Polar bear devours research scientist in front of colleagues. November 8, 2024. The Arctic wind howled across the barren expanse of Svalbard's Ny-Ålesund research station with a ferocity that seemed to pierce through every layer of protective clothing, every reinforced wall, every carefully constructed barrier between civilization and the raw, unforgiving wilderness that stretched endlessly in all directions. Dr. Olivia Marie Bennett stood at the reinforced window of the Zeppelin Observatory's main laboratory, her breath fogging the triple-paned glass as she gazed out at the landscape that had become both her passion and her prison over the past 14 months. At 36 years old, she had dedicated nearly half her life to understanding the complex relationship between atmospheric conditions and climate change in the polar regions. But nothing in her extensive education at MIT, her postdoctoral work at the University of Copenhagen, or her previous field experiences in Greenland and Antarctica had prepared her for the psychological weight of spending an extended winter in one of the world's most isolated research outposts. The date was November 8, 2024, and the polar night had settled over Svalbard like a thick, suffocating blanket. For the past 2 months, the sun had been nothing more than a memory, replaced by an endless twilight that played tricks on the mind and challenged even the most experienced Arctic researchers. The temperature outside registered -42 degrees Celsius, with wind speeds gusting up to 70 kilometers per hour, creating conditions that would kill an unprotected human being in a matter of minutes. Yet for Olivia, this harsh environment represented the cutting edge of climate science, a natural laboratory where she could study atmospheric phenomena that were impossible to replicate anywhere else on Earth. Born in Burlington, Vermont, to parents who were both environmental scientists, Olivia had grown up surrounded by discussions of climate data, research methodologies, and the urgent need to understand humanity's impact on the planet's delicate ecological balance. Her father, Dr. James Bennett, had spent decades studying acid rain in the northeastern United States, while her mother, Dr. Sarah Chen Bennett, specialized in forest ecology and had written extensively about the impact of climate change on North American deciduous forests. From an early age, Olivia had been exposed to the rigorous demands of scientific research, the long hours spent analyzing data, and the profound satisfaction that came from contributing to humanity's understanding of the natural world. Her childhood in Vermont had been marked by countless hiking trips through the Green Mountains, camping expeditions that taught her to appreciate both the beauty and the danger of wilderness environments, and long discussions around the dinner table about the latest developments in environmental science. By the time she reached high school, Olivia had already decided that she wanted to follow in her parents' footsteps, but she was determined to push beyond their terrestrial focus and explore the planet's most extreme environments. The polar regions, with their unique atmospheric conditions and critical role in global climate patterns, represented the ultimate challenge for someone with her scientific background and adventurous spirit. Her undergraduate years at MIT had been transformative, not just academically, but personally. She had excelled in her atmospheric sciences coursework, earning the highest grades in her class, while simultaneously participating in mountaineering clubs and Arctic survival training programs. It was during her junior year that she had met Dr. Marcus Hoffmann, a visiting professor from the Norwegian Institute for Polar Research, who would become both her mentor and the catalyst for her lifelong fascination with Arctic atmospheric phenomena. Dr. Hoffmann, a tall, weathered man in his early 60s with piercing blue eyes and a thick Norwegian accent, had spent over 30 years conducting research in Svalbard, Greenland, and the Canadian Arctic. His lectures about the unique challenges of polar research, combined with his vivid descriptions of the otherworldly beauty of the Arctic landscape, had ignited something in Olivia that she had never experienced before. Under Dr. Hoffman's guidance, Olivia had focused her senior thesis on the relationship between Arctic sea ice loss and changes in atmospheric circulation patterns. The research had required her to analyze decades of meteorological data from research stations across the Arctic, a painstaking process that had taught her the value of patience and meticulous attention to detail. More importantly, it had given her a deep appreciation for the complex interconnections between different components of the Earth's climate system and the critical importance of long-term data collection in understanding these relationships. Her graduate work at MIT had been even more focused, with a doctoral dissertation that examined the role of Arctic temperature inversions in global atmospheric circulation patterns. The research had required her to spend several summers at research stations in northern Alaska and Greenland, experiences that had given her a taste of the isolation and physical challenges that came with polar research. She had loved every minute of it, from the mind-numbing cold that required constant vigilance to avoid frostbite, to the breathtaking beauty of landscapes that seemed to exist outside of normal human experience. The vast expanses of ice and snow, the ethereal quality of the light during the brief Arctic summer, and the profound silence that could be both peaceful and terrifying, had all combined to create an environment that felt more like another planet than another part of Earth. After completing her PhD at the age of 28, Olivia had accepted a postdoctoral position at the University of Copenhagen Center for Ice and Climate, where she had worked under Dr. Erik Larsen, one of the world's leading experts on polar atmospheric dynamics. The position had given her access to some of the most advanced atmospheric monitoring equipment in the world, and had allowed her to participate in several major international research collaborations. More importantly, it had brought her into contact with the community of polar researchers who would eventually recommend her for the position at the Zeppelin Observatory in Ny-Ålesund. The Zeppelin Observatory, perched on a mountain ridge 474 meters above sea level, was one of the most important atmospheric research stations in the Arctic. Operated jointly by the Norwegian Institute for Air Research and the Stockholm University, the station conducted year-round monitoring of atmospheric composition, including measurements of greenhouse gases, aerosols, and ozone concentrations. The data collected at the station was crucial for understanding global climate change, as the Arctic regions were experiencing warming at twice the global average rate, a phenomenon known as Arctic amplification that had profound implications for weather patterns around the world. Olivia's role at the station involved overseeing the atmospheric monitoring equipment, analyzing data from a network of sensors that operated continuously throughout the year, and coordinating with researchers at institutions around the world to ensure that the data was properly integrated into global climate models. It was exactly the kind of work she had dreamed of doing since her undergraduate days, but the reality of spending 14 months in one of the world's most isolated locations had proven more challenging than she had anticipated. The research team at Ny-Ålesund consisted of 15 individuals from 8 different countries, each bringing their own expertise and personality to the close-knit community that had formed around their shared mission. Dr. Henrik Andersen, the station director, was a 48-year-old Norwegian glaciologist who had been working in Svalbard for over 20 years. A tall, serious man with greying hair and deep-set brown eyes, Henrik had the kind of practical competence that came from decades of experience in extreme environments. He had grown up in Tromsø, above the Arctic Circle, and had spent his entire adult life studying the impact of climate change on Arctic ice formations. His wife and 2 teenage children lived in Oslo, and he typically spent 3 months at a time at the station before returning home for a month of leave. Dr. James Macready, a Scottish oceanographer specializing in Arctic sea ice dynamics, was 32 years old and had joined the team 6 months earlier. Tall and lanky, with red hair and a thick beard, James had a quick wit and an infectious laugh that had helped maintain morale during the darkest days of the polar night. He had completed his PhD at the University of Edinburgh, where he had studied the relationship between sea ice loss and changes in ocean circulation patterns. His research at Ny-Ålesund focused on collecting oceanographic data from the fjords around Svalbard and analyzing how changes in sea ice coverage were affecting local marine ecosystems. Dr. Anna Kowalski, a 39-year-old atmospheric physicist from Poland, was responsible for maintaining and calibrating much of the station's sophisticated monitoring equipment. A quiet, methodical woman with short dark hair and intense green eyes, Anna had earned her doctorate from the University of Warsaw before spending several years working at research stations in Antarctica. She had joined the Ny-Ålesund team 2 years earlier and had proven invaluable in keeping the station's complex array of sensors and instruments functioning properly in the harsh Arctic environment. Her attention to detail and technical expertise had earned the respect of everyone on the team, and she had become particularly close friends with Olivia over the past year. Dr. Chen Wei, a Chinese meteorologist specializing in polar weather systems, was 29 years old and the youngest member of the research team. Slight in build, but surprisingly tough, Chen had grown up in Beijing and had completed his graduate work at Peking University before accepting a postdoctoral position that had brought him to Svalbard. His research focused on understanding how changes in Arctic atmospheric conditions were affecting weather patterns across Asia, and his work had already contributed to several important publications in leading climate science journals. Despite the language barrier that sometimes made communication challenging, Chen had integrated well into the team and had developed a particular friendship with James Macready, who shared his love of chess and obscure science fiction novels. Dr. Maria Santos, a Brazilian biologist studying Arctic microbial communities, was 34 years old and had been at the station for 8 months. Originally from São Paulo, Maria had never experienced temperatures below freezing before arriving in Svalbard, but she had adapted to the extreme conditions with remarkable grace and determination. Her research involved collecting samples from permafrost, snow, and ice formations to study the microorganisms that managed to survive in the harsh Arctic environment. The work required her to spend long hours outdoors in dangerous conditions, but she approached each expedition with meticulous planning and an infectious enthusiasm that inspired her colleagues. The technical support staff included Bjørn Eriksson, a 52-year-old Norwegian engineer who was responsible for maintaining the station's power systems, heating equipment, and communications infrastructure. A stocky man with calloused hands and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, Bjørn had worked in various Arctic research stations for over 25 years and had seen every kind of equipment failure, weather emergency, and human crisis that could occur in the polar environment. His wife had died of cancer 3 years earlier, and he had thrown himself into his work with a dedication that sometimes worried his colleagues. He rarely spoke about his personal life, but his technical expertise and unflappable demeanor in crisis situations had made him an invaluable member of the team. Lars Andersen, Henrik's 26-year-old nephew, served as the station's logistics coordinator and general assistant. A recent graduate of the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, with a degree in mechanical engineering, Lars had convinced his uncle to give him the position as a way of gaining practical experience before pursuing graduate studies. Tall and athletic, with blonde hair and blue eyes that marked him unmistakably as Scandinavian, Lars had the kind of youthful enthusiasm that sometimes grated on the more experienced researchers, but also brought a welcome energy to the isolated community. He was responsible for managing supply deliveries, coordinating transportation, and handling much of the routine maintenance work that kept the station functioning. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a Japanese atmospheric chemist studying Arctic ozone depletion, was 37 years old and had been at the station for 10 months. A petite woman with shoulder-length black hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Yuki had earned her doctorate from Tokyo University before spending several years working at research stations in Antarctica and Greenland. Her English was excellent, though she sometimes struggled with the technical jargon used by her European colleagues. Her research involved analyzing air samples to understand how changes in Arctic atmospheric chemistry were affecting the ozone layer, work that required both sophisticated analytical techniques and enormous patience with complex data sets. The team also included Dr. Robert Thompson, a 41-year-old Canadian geophysicist studying seismic activity in the Arctic region. A large man with a thick brown beard and hands that seemed too big for the delicate scientific instruments he worked with, Robert had grown up in northern Quebec and had spent his entire career working in cold environments. His research involved monitoring underground temperature changes and seismic activity that might indicate changes in permafrost stability, work that was becoming increasingly important as Arctic warming accelerated the thawing of permanently frozen ground across the region. Dr. Sophie Dubois, a 33-year-old French glaciologist, had joined the team 4 months earlier to study ice core samples from nearby glaciers. Tall and elegant, with dark hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, Sophie had completed her graduate work at the University of Grenoble before spending several years working with ice core researchers in Antarctica. Her work at Ny-Ålesund involved collecting and analyzing ice cores that could provide detailed records of atmospheric conditions and climate change over the past several thousand years. The physical demands of her work, which often required her to spend long days drilling and collecting samples in extremely harsh conditions, had earned her the respect of even the most experienced team members. The final 2 members of the team were graduate students who had arrived just 2 months earlier as part of an international exchange program. Thomas Müller, a 24-year-old German student pursuing his master's degree in atmospheric sciences at the University of Munich, was working on a thesis project involving the analysis of aerosol particles in Arctic air masses. Tall and serious, with dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Thomas approached his work with a methodical precision that reminded Olivia of herself at that age. His English was good, but heavily accented, and he sometimes struggled to keep up with the rapid-fire discussions that characterized the team's daily meetings. Ingrid Petersen, a 23-year-old Danish student completing her master's degree in polar biology at the University of Copenhagen, was the youngest member of the team and had initially struggled with the isolation and extreme conditions. A small woman with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, Ingrid had grown up in a comfortable suburb of Copenhagen and had never experienced anything like the harsh realities of Arctic life. However, her enthusiasm for her research project, which involved studying the impact of climate change on Arctic plant communities, had helped her adapt to the challenging environment. She had developed a particularly close relationship with Maria Santos, who had taken on an informal mentoring role and helped her develop the practical skills needed for outdoor research in extreme conditions. The Ny-Ålesund research station itself was a marvel of engineering designed to support human life and sophisticated scientific research in one of the world's harshest environments. The main building was a 2-story structure built on reinforced concrete foundations that extended deep into the permafrost to prevent heat loss from thawing the ground underneath. The exterior walls were constructed with triple-layer insulation and special materials designed to withstand extreme temperature fluctuations and hurricane-force winds. The building housed the main laboratory spaces, computer facilities, living quarters, dining hall, recreation area, and emergency shelter areas that could support the entire team for several weeks if outside conditions made evacuation impossible. The Zeppelin Observatory itself was located on a mountain ridge, about 2 kilometers from the main station, connected by a cable car system that could transport personnel and equipment even in severe weather conditions. The observatory building was smaller, but even more heavily reinforced, containing the most sensitive atmospheric monitoring equipment, including spectrometers, particle counters, gas chromatographs, and automated sampling systems that operated continuously throughout the year. The data collected by these instruments was transmitted via satellite link to research institutions around the world, making Ny-Ålesund a crucial node in the global network of climate monitoring stations. The location of Ny-Ålesund, at 78.9 degrees north latitude on the western shore of the Kongsfjorden Fjord, placed it well within the range of Svalbard's polar bear population. The archipelago was home to approximately 3,000 polar bears, making it one of the world's most important polar bear habitats. These massive predators, which could weigh up to 800 kilograms and measure nearly 3 meters in length, were perfectly adapted to the Arctic environment, but had become increasingly dangerous to humans as climate change forced them to spend more time on land searching for food. The bears were most commonly encountered during the spring and fall months, when sea ice formation was unstable, forcing them to travel along the coastline in search of seals and other prey. However, the warming climate had made their behavior increasingly unpredictable, and encounters with humans had become more frequent as traditional food sources became scarcer. The Norwegian authorities required all personnel working in Svalbard to carry firearms and undergo extensive training in bear safety protocols, but the reality was that polar bears were such formidable predators that even well-armed and trained individuals were at serious risk if they encountered one of these animals in the wild. The research station maintained strict protocols for outdoor activities, requiring personnel to travel in groups, carry emergency communication devices, and file detailed activity reports before leaving the immediate vicinity of the buildings. Motion sensors and cameras monitored the perimeter of the station continuously, and automated alarms would sound if any large animals were detected in the area. Despite these precautions, everyone at the station understood that they were living in an environment where a single mistake or equipment failure could result in a deadly encounter with one of nature's most dangerous predators. On the morning of November 8, 2024, Olivia had awakened at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of wind howling around the research station with an intensity that made the reinforced walls vibrate. She had been sleeping poorly for the past several weeks, a common problem during the polar night when the absence of natural sunlight disrupted normal circadian rhythms and made it difficult to maintain regular sleep patterns. The station's artificial lighting system was designed to simulate natural daylight cycles, but nothing could completely compensate for the psychological impact of living in continuous darkness for months at a time. After dressing in the layers of thermal clothing that had become second nature after 14 months in the Arctic, Olivia had made her way to the station's main laboratory to check on the overnight data collection from the atmospheric monitoring equipment. This had become her daily routine, starting each morning by reviewing the data streams from the dozens of sensors and instruments that operated continuously to monitor atmospheric conditions, air quality, and weather patterns. The work required intense concentration and attention to detail, as even small anomalies in the data could indicate equipment problems or significant changes in atmospheric conditions that might be relevant to climate research. The data from the previous night showed several interesting anomalies in the atmospheric particle measurements. Readings that suggested the presence of unusual aerosol concentrations that could indicate changes in weather patterns or the presence of atmospheric disturbances from distant sources. Olivia spent nearly 2 hours analyzing the data, cross-referencing it with meteorological reports from other Arctic research stations and satellite observations to try to understand what might be causing the unusual readings. The work was exactly the kind of detailed scientific analysis that she had trained for throughout her academic career, but the isolation and extreme conditions made even routine tasks feel more challenging than they would have in a normal laboratory setting. At 8:45 a.m., she joined her colleagues in the station's dining hall for breakfast, a communal meal that served as much social function as nutritional necessity. The team had learned over the months that maintaining social connections and regular routines was crucial for psychological health during the long polar night, and the shared meals had become an important part of their daily rhythm. The conversation that morning focused on the unusual atmospheric readings that several team members had noticed in their own data streams, leading to a discussion about the possibility of organizing an outdoor sampling expedition to collect additional data from the immediate vicinity of the station. Dr. Henrik Anderson, the station director, was initially reluctant to approve any outdoor activities given the severe weather conditions and the recent reports of increased polar bear activity in the region. The Norwegian authorities had issued several warnings over the past few weeks about bears being spotted closer to human settlements than usual, behavior that wildlife experts attributed to the unusually late formation of sea ice that was forcing the animals to remain on land longer than normal. However, the scientific value of collecting fresh atmospheric samples during the unusual conditions convinced him to authorize a limited expedition with strict safety protocols. The team that would participate in the sampling expedition was carefully selected based on experience, physical fitness, and the specific scientific expertise needed for the data collection. Olivia would lead the expedition as the senior atmospheric scientist, accompanied by Dr. Anna Kowalski to handle the technical aspects of sample collection, Dr. James McCready to provide additional safety support and document the expedition, and Lars Anderson to serve as the local guide and handle logistics. Björn Eriksson would remain at the station to monitor their progress via radio communication and coordinate emergency response if needed. The preparation for the expedition took nearly 3 hours, as each piece of equipment had to be carefully checked and double-checked to ensure that it would function properly in the extreme conditions. The temperature outside was -45 degrees Celsius with sustained winds of 60 kilometers per hour, creating wind chill conditions that could cause frostbite in exposed skin within minutes. Each team member would carry multiple layers of insulated clothing, emergency shelter materials, high-energy food supplies, and communication equipment that could maintain contact with the station even in severe weather. The sampling equipment itself required special preparations, as the extreme cold could cause batteries to fail, metal components to become brittle, and sensitive instruments to produce inaccurate readings. Anna spent considerable time calibrating the portable spectrometers and particle counters that would be used to collect atmospheric data, while Olivia reviewed the sampling protocols to ensure that they could collect scientifically valid data while minimizing the time spent outside in the dangerous conditions. The expedition was scheduled to begin at 2 p.m., taking advantage of the brief period of twilight that provided the closest approximation to daylight during the polar night. The plan called for the team to travel approximately 500 meters from the main research station to a predetermined sampling location that had been selected based on previous meteorological data and accessibility considerations. The entire expedition was expected to take no more than 90 minutes, including travel time and the collection of atmospheric samples from multiple locations around the sampling site. At 1:30 p.m., The team gathered in the station's equipment room to conduct final preparations and safety checks. Each member reviewed their emergency procedures, confirmed that their communication equipment was functioning properly, and verified that they had all necessary safety gear, including flares, emergency shelters, and first aid supplies. The station's automated monitoring systems were programmed to track their progress and alert the support team if they failed to check in at predetermined intervals. The expedition members were also required to carry firearms as protection against polar bears, a precaution that all personnel in Svalbard were legally required to take when leaving secure facilities. Olivia carried a Remington 870 shotgun loaded with special high-powered ammunition designed to stop large predators, while James McCready was armed with a rifle that could deliver accurate shots at longer range. Both scientists had undergone extensive firearms training as part of their preparation for Arctic research, but the reality of carrying lethal weapons while conducting scientific research served as a constant reminder of the dangerous environment in which they were working. At exactly 2 p.m., the expedition team stepped outside the research station into conditions that were immediately overwhelming in their intensity. The wind struck them with physical force, driving snow and ice particles horizontally across the landscape, with enough velocity to sting exposed areas of skin, even through multiple layers of protective clothing. The temperature, combined with the wind chill, created an environment that was literally hostile to human life, requiring constant vigilance and awareness to prevent hypothermia, frostbite, and other cold-related injuries. The landscape around Ny-Ålesund in November was almost alien in its stark beauty and harsh geometry. Snow had been sculpted by months of wind into complex formations that created natural barriers and channels across the terrain, while the nearby fjord was covered with ice that groaned and cracked audibly as thermal stresses caused the frozen surface to shift and move. The mountains that surrounded the research station on three sides loomed like massive sentinels in the perpetual twilight, their peaks obscured by low-hanging clouds that were backlit by the faint glow that passed for daylight in the polar night. Visibility was limited to perhaps 50 meters in most directions due to the blowing snow and the lack of natural light, making navigation challenging even with GPS equipment and detailed knowledge of the local terrain. The team moved in single file with Lars Anderson leading the way, his intimate knowledge of the area around the research station proving invaluable for avoiding the most dangerous terrain features and finding the safest route to their destination. Each team member was connected to the others by safety lines that would prevent anyone from becoming separated in the limited visibility, a precaution that had saved lives in previous Arctic expeditions when individuals became disoriented and lost in similar conditions. The sound environment was dominated by the constant howling of wind, a noise that seemed to penetrate every layer of protective clothing and created a psychological pressure that was difficult to ignore. Communication between team members required shouting to be heard over the wind, and even then, the extreme cold made speaking difficult as breath condensed and froze almost instantly. The team had developed a system of hand signals for basic communication, but the thick gloves and limited visibility made even these simple gestures challenging to interpret. After 25 minutes of careful navigation across the treacherous terrain, the expedition team reached their designated sampling location, a slight depression in the landscape that provided some protection from the wind while still offering access to the atmospheric conditions they needed to study. The location had been selected based on previous meteorological data that suggested it would provide representative samples of the atmospheric phenomena that had been detected by the station's monitoring equipment, while also offering some practical advantages for conducting fieldwork in extreme conditions. The scientific work began immediately, as every minute spent outside in the harsh conditions increased the risk of cold-related injuries and equipment failures. Anna Kowalski set up the portable atmospheric monitoring equipment while Olivia collected air samples using specialized containers designed to preserve atmospheric gases and particles for later analysis. The work required extreme precision despite the difficult conditions, as contamination or procedural errors could invalidate the scientific value of the samples they were collecting at considerable risk to their safety. James Macready documented the expedition using a camera equipped with special cold weather housing, capturing images of the sampling procedures and the environmental conditions that would be crucial for interpreting the scientific data they were collecting. His photography also served as a safety record that could be analyzed if anything went wrong during the expedition, providing valuable information for future safety protocols and expedition planning. The team worked with remarkable efficiency despite the challenging conditions, their months of experience in the Arctic environment having taught them to move quickly and decisively when working outdoors in extreme weather. Within 30 minutes of reaching the sampling location, they had collected all the atmospheric samples they needed and documented the environmental conditions that would be necessary for proper scientific analysis of their data. At 2:55 p.m., as the team was preparing to return to the research station, Lars Anderson noticed something that made him freeze in place and hold up his hand in the signal for immediate silence and attention. In the limited visibility created by the blowing snow, he had glimpsed a large, pale shape moving slowly across the landscape approximately 100 meters from their location. The shape was too large and moved too deliberately to be anything other than a polar bear, and its presence immediately transformed their scientific expedition into a potentially life-threatening emergency situation. Polar bears are among the world's most dangerous predators, perfectly adapted for hunting in the Arctic environment, and possessing physical capabilities that make them extremely difficult for humans to escape or deter. An adult male polar bear can weigh up to 800 kilograms, stand over 3 meters tall on its hind legs, and run at speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour across snow and ice. Their sense of smell is so acute that they can detect seals beneath several feet of ice from distances of over a kilometer, and their hunting instincts are so refined that they can remain motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect opportunity to attack. More importantly for the research team's immediate situation, polar bears have no natural fear of humans and will investigate anything unusual in their territory with the methodical patience of apex predators who have never encountered anything they could not kill and eat. Unlike brown bears or black bears, which will typically avoid human contact if given the opportunity, polar bears are curious and persistent, qualities that make them extraordinarily dangerous to encounter in the wild. Lars immediately activated the team's emergency communication system, sending a coded message to the research station that would alert Björn Eriksson and the other team members that they had encountered a polar bear and might need immediate assistance. The emergency protocols that all Arctic research teams were required to follow in bear encounters emphasized the importance of remaining calm, avoiding sudden movements, and using deterrent methods before resorting to firearms. But the reality was that polar bears were so large and dangerous that lethal force was often the only effective option for protecting human life. The bear that Lars had spotted appeared to be a large adult, possibly a male, moving slowly but deliberately in their general direction. Its behavior suggested that it had detected their presence, either through scent or the sounds of their equipment, and was investigating the unusual activity in its territory. Polar bears are naturally curious animals, and the unfamiliar smells and sounds associated with scientific equipment and human activity would likely attract, rather than deter, a bear's attention. Olivia felt her heart rate increase dramatically as the implications of their situation became clear. Despite her extensive training in polar bear safety protocols and her 14 months of experience living in bear territory, this was her first direct encounter with one of these massive predators in the wild. The theoretical knowledge of bear behavior and safety procedures suddenly seemed inadequate when faced with the reality of a creature that could kill her in a matter of seconds if it decided to attack. The team's emergency protocols called for them to form a defensive group with their backs to each other, prepare their deterrent devices, including flares and noisemakers, and ready their firearms while attempting to slowly back away from the bear without making sudden movements or loud noises that might trigger an aggressive response. However, the extreme weather conditions and limited visibility made it difficult to implement these procedures effectively, as the howling wind masked their movements, and the blowing snow made it challenging to maintain visual contact with the bear. James McCready had moved to a position where he could observe the bear's movements while maintaining cover behind a snow formation that might provide some protection if the animal charged. His rifle was equipped with a high-powered scope that allowed him to track the bear's location even in the limited visibility, and he maintained constant communication with the rest of the team about the animal's position and behavior. The bear appeared to be moving slowly but steadily in their direction, pausing occasionally to test the air with its sensitive nose as it attempted to identify the source of the unfamiliar scents. Anna Kowalski was rapidly packing the scientific equipment that they had been using for atmospheric sampling, working to secure the valuable instruments while simultaneously preparing for a potential emergency evacuation. The equipment represented months of work and thousands of dollars in specialized scientific instruments, but the team's safety protocols were clear that human life took precedence over any material considerations. Still, the loss of the equipment would be a significant setback for their research program, and Anna worked as quickly as possible to save what she could, while remaining ready to abandon everything if the situation deteriorated. At 3:02 p.m., the bear's behavior changed in a way that immediately elevated the threat level of the encounter. Instead of continuing its slow, investigative approach, the animal had stopped moving and was standing completely still while facing directly toward the research team's location. This change in behavior suggested that the bear had positively identified them as a potential threat or prey item and was assessing the situation before deciding how to proceed. Polar bears are patient hunters that will often observe their target for extended periods before making a decision to attack, but the motionless stance also suggested that the animal was preparing for a possible charge. Lars Anderson had encountered polar bears on several previous occasions during his time in Svalbard, and his experience told him that the animal's current behavior represented an extremely dangerous escalation of the situation. He quietly passed word to the other team members that they needed to prepare for the possibility of an immediate attack, while simultaneously working to establish radio contact with the research station to request emergency helicopter evacuation if weather conditions permitted. The research station maintained emergency agreements with several helicopter services based in Longyearbyen, the administrative center of Svalbard, located approximately 120 kilometers south of Ny-Ålesund. Under normal weather conditions, a helicopter could reach their location within 20 to 30 minutes of receiving an emergency call, but the current storm conditions made helicopter operations extremely dangerous and possibly impossible. The decision to launch a rescue helicopter would depend on the specific weather conditions at the time, the severity of the emergency, and the availability of pilots willing to risk flying in marginal conditions. At the research station, Björn Eriksson had received the emergency communication from the expedition team and was already initiating the emergency response protocols that had been established for exactly this type of situation. He immediately contacted the Norwegian emergency services in Longyearbyen to alert them of the potential crisis, while simultaneously attempting to establish direct radio communication with helicopter services to assess the possibility of emergency evacuation. The weather conditions were marginal for helicopter operations, with high winds and limited visibility creating extremely dangerous flying conditions. But the severity of the bear encounter meant that rescue services would likely attempt an evacuation if the situation deteriorated further. The other members of the research team who had remained at the station were also activated as part of the emergency response, with Dr. Henrik Andersen taking command of the situation from the station, while other team members prepared emergency medical supplies and established communication links with emergency services throughout the region. The isolation of Ny-Ålesund meant that the research station had to be largely self-sufficient in emergency situations, but they maintained cooperative agreements with Norwegian authorities and international rescue services that could provide assistance in life-threatening situations. At 3:05 p.m., the polar bear began moving again, but its behavior had changed dramatically from the slow, investigative approach it had been using previously. The animal was now moving more purposefully toward the research team's location, covering ground with the efficient ground-eating lope that polar bears use when they have identified a target and are closing distance for a potential attack. The bear's head was lowered and its ears were laid back against its skull, body language that experienced Arctic residents recognized as indicating aggressive intent. Lars immediately made the decision that the situation had escalated beyond the point where deterrent methods were likely to be effective, and he signaled to James McCready to prepare for defensive shooting if the bear continued its approach. The team's safety protocols specified that firearms should only be used as a last resort, but the bear's current behavior suggested that it was preparing to attack, and that deterrent methods were unlikely to be sufficient to protect the team's safety. The distance between the bear and the research team was now approximately 60 meters and closing, with the animal moving at a steady pace that would bring it within charging range within the next minute or two. Polar bears can cover short distances at remarkable speed, and once a bear comes within 20 to 30 meters of a human target, it becomes extremely difficult to stop the animal with firearms before it can reach and attack its intended victim. James McCready had positioned himself in a stable shooting stance and had the bear clearly visible through his rifle scope, but the extreme weather conditions made accurate shooting challenging, even for someone with his extensive firearms training. The wind was gusting up to 70 kilometers per hour, which could significantly affect bullet trajectory, while the cold temperatures could affect the performance of the rifle's mechanical components. Additionally, the limited visibility and blowing snow made it difficult to maintain a clear sight picture of the target. The psychological pressure of the situation was intense for all team members, as they found themselves in a life-threatening situation that could escalate to lethal violence within a matter of seconds. Despite their extensive training and preparation for exactly this type of emergency, the reality of facing a massive predator in its natural environment was profoundly different from any simulation or training exercise they had experienced. The knowledge that their lives might depend on split-second decisions and the accurate performance of their weapons under extreme conditions created a level of stress that was difficult to manage while simultaneously trying to implement complex emergency procedures. At 3:07 p.m., the bear stopped again, this time at a distance of approximately 40 meters from the research team's position. The animal raised its head and tested the air with its nose, a behavior that suggested it was still gathering information about the unusual situation it had encountered. However, its body posture remained aggressive, with muscles visibly tensed and ready for explosive movement. The pause gave the research team a brief opportunity to reassess their situation and consider their options, but it also created additional psychological pressure as they waited to see what the bear would do next. During this pause, Olivia found herself experiencing the kind of hyper-awareness that often accompanies life-threatening situations, where time seems to slow down and every sensory detail becomes intensely vivid. She could hear her own heartbeat over the howling wind, feel the cold air burning her lungs with each breath, and see the individual snowflakes that were being driven horizontally across her field of vision by the fierce Arctic wind. The bear itself seemed almost mythical in the harsh environment, a massive creature perfectly adapted to conditions that were hostile to human survival, representing the raw power of nature in one of the world's most unforgiving environments. The scientific part of her mind, trained through years of academic discipline to observe and analyze even under stress, noted details about the bear's appearance and behavior that might be relevant to understanding polar bear ecology and behavior. The animal was clearly a large adult, probably male, with the characteristic long neck and narrow head that distinguished polar bears from other bear species. Its coat appeared thick and healthy, suggesting that it was well fed and in good physical condition, which might actually make it more dangerous, as well-fed bears were often more confident and aggressive than malnourished animals that might be more focused on finding easy food sources. The bear's behavior also provided insights into how these animals responded to human presence in their territory. Rather than fleeing from the unfamiliar sights and sounds, this bear had approached to investigate, demonstrating the curiosity and fearlessness that made polar bears so dangerous to humans living and working in the Arctic. The animal's patient, methodical approach suggested that it was assessing the research team as potential prey, using the same hunting strategies that it would employ when stalking seals or other natural prey species. At 3:09 p.m., the situation took a dramatic turn when the polar bear suddenly dropped to a crouch and began moving toward the research team with the distinctive stalking behavior that polar bears use when preparing to attack prey. The animal's head was lowered almost to ground level. Its powerful shoulders were hunched forward, and it was moving with the fluid, predatory grace that had made polar bears the Arctic's apex predator for thousands of years. Lars Anderson immediately shouted a warning to the rest of the team while simultaneously firing a warning flare into the air in a desperate attempt to frighten the bear away from its attack. The bright red flare created a brilliant flash of light and a loud popping sound that should have startled the animal and possibly convinced it to retreat, but the bear showed no reaction to the deterrent beyond a brief pause in its forward movement. James McCready had the bear clearly in his rifle sights and was tracking its movement as it approached, but he was waiting for Lars's command before firing, as the expedition's safety protocols required that deterrent methods be exhausted before resorting to lethal force. However, the bear's behavior now clearly indicated that it was committed to an attack, and the window of opportunity for effective defensive shooting was rapidly closing as the animal moved closer to the team's position. The distance between the bear and the research team was now less than 30 meters and decreasing rapidly, placing them within the range where a polar bear could launch a devastating charge that would cover the remaining distance in a matter of seconds. At this range, the bear's enormous size and power became truly intimidating, as the team could see the details of its massive paws, powerful claws, and the intelligent eyes that were focused intently on their position. Anna Kowalski had abandoned any attempt to save the scientific equipment and was now focused entirely on preparing for emergency evacuation. but the bear's position between their current location and the research station made retreat extremely dangerous. Polar bears are faster than humans across snow and ice, and attempting to run would likely trigger the animal's chase instinct and result in a deadly pursuit that the research team could not hope to win. At 3:11 p.m., the polar bear began its final charge, rising from its stalking crouch and launching itself toward the research team with the explosive acceleration that made these animals such effective predators. The bear covered the first 10 meters of distance in less than 2 seconds, its powerful legs driving it forward with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for such a massive creature. James McCready fired his first shot when the bear was approximately 20 meters away, aiming for the animal's center of mass to maximize his chances of stopping the attack. The high-powered rifle bullet struck the bear in the shoulder, creating a visible impact that caused the animal to stumble slightly, but did not stop its forward momentum. Polar bears are incredibly robust animals, with thick layers of fat and dense bone structure that can absorb tremendous punishment, and stopping a charging bear requires precise shot placement or multiple hits to vital areas. The bear's reaction to being shot was to become even more aggressive and determined in its attack, a response that wildlife experts had documented in numerous polar bear encounters. Unlike some predators that might retreat when wounded, polar bears often become more dangerous when injured, as their natural response is to eliminate the threat that has caused them pain. Lars Anderson was also firing at the charging bear, using his shotgun to deliver multiple rounds of heavy buckshot that were designed to stop large predators at close range. Several of his shots hit the animal, creating visible wounds in its flanks and hindquarters, but the bear's thick coat and massive size allowed it to continue its charge despite the injuries it had sustained. The sound of gunfire in the Arctic environment was overwhelmed by the howling wind, but the muzzle flashes from the weapons created brief moments of brilliant illumination that starkly highlighted the drama of the life-and-death struggle taking place in the harsh polar landscape. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the clean, cold air of the Arctic, creating a sensory combination that would remain burned into the memories of anyone who survived the encounter. At 15 meters, the bear was still coming, despite having absorbed multiple gunshot wounds that would have stopped most animals. Its determination and physical resilience demonstrated why polar bears were considered among the world's most dangerous predators, and why encounters with these animals so often ended in tragedy for the humans involved. Olivia found herself unable to move or react as the massive predator bore down on the research team, her mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. Despite her extensive training and preparation for Arctic emergencies, nothing had prepared her for the visceral terror of facing a charging polar bear in conditions that made escape impossible and defense extremely difficult. At 10 meters, James McCready fired his second shot, this time aiming for the bear's head in an attempt to deliver an immediately incapacitating hit to the animal's brain or central nervous system. The shot was accurate, striking the bear in the face and causing massive trauma, but the animal's momentum carried it forward even as it began to collapse. The wounded and dying polar bear crashed into the research team's position with the force of a small avalanche, its massive body weighing nearly 400 kilograms and moving at considerable speed when it finally succumbed to its injuries. The impact scattered the team members and sent equipment flying across the snow-covered landscape. But miraculously, no one was crushed or seriously injured by the bear's final charge. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, the research team found themselves in a state of shock that made it difficult to assess their situation or take appropriate action. The sudden transition from life-threatening danger to relative safety left them disoriented and struggling to process what had just occurred. The dead polar bear lay motionless in the snow just a few meters from their position, its massive size and perfect adaptation to the Arctic environment making it seem almost mythical even in death. Lars Anderson was the first to recover his composure sufficiently to take action, immediately activating his emergency radio to contact the research station and report that the bear had been killed and that all team members appeared to be uninjured. However, he also requested immediate helicopter evacuation, as the sound of gunfire and the presence of a dead bear in the area might attract other predators or create additional safety concerns that made remaining at the sampling site inadvisable. The psychological impact of the encounter was profound for all team members. But it was particularly intense for Olivia, who had never experienced life-threatening violence of any kind and was struggling to cope with the realization of how close they had all come to being killed and eaten by one of nature's most efficient predators. The clinical, analytical part of her mind that had been trained through years of scientific education was still functioning, noting details about the bear's behavior and the effectiveness of their emergency procedures. But the emotional impact of the encounter was overwhelming her ability to think clearly about their immediate situation. At 3:18 p.m., just 7 minutes after the bear had been killed, the research team could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching through the storm, indicating that emergency services had been able to launch a rescue mission despite the challenging weather conditions. The helicopter was a Bell 212 operated by the Norwegian Emergency Services, equipped with specialized equipment for Arctic rescues and crewed by pilots with extensive experience operating in extreme weather conditions. The helicopter's arrival created additional complications, as the pilot had to find a safe landing zone in the limited visibility while avoiding the dead polar bear and the scattered equipment that surrounded the research team's position. The extreme wind conditions also made the landing extremely dangerous, requiring exceptional skill and experience to set the aircraft down safely in an area that was not specifically prepared for helicopter operations. However, the helicopter crew managed to execute a successful landing approximately 50 meters from the research team's position, and within minutes, the 4 expedition members were aboard the aircraft and being evacuated back to the research station. The dead polar bear was left at the sampling site, as Norwegian regulations required that polar bear deaths be investigated by wildlife authorities, and the carcass could not be moved without official permission. The helicopter flight back to the research station took only 5 minutes, but the experience of being airborne in the severe storm conditions was almost as terrifying as the bear encounter had been. The aircraft was buffeted by powerful wind gusts that caused it to pitch and yaw violently, while the limited visibility made it difficult for the pilot to maintain visual contact with the ground. However, the crew's expertise and the helicopter's advanced navigation equipment allowed them to complete the evacuation safely, despite the challenging conditions. Upon arriving at the research station, the expedition team was immediately taken to the medical facility for evaluation and treatment of any injuries they might have sustained during the bear encounter. Although none of the team members had been physically injured by the bear itself, the extreme stress and physical demands of the situation had taken a toll that required medical attention. Additionally, the standard protocols for any bear encounter required comprehensive medical evaluation to ensure that no injuries had been overlooked in the immediate aftermath of the traumatic experience. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had medical training in addition to her atmospheric chemistry expertise, conducted the initial medical evaluations with assistance from Björn Eriksson, who had extensive first aid training from his years working in Arctic environments. All 4 expedition members showed signs of acute stress response, including elevated heart rates, elevated blood pressure, and the kind of psychological disorientation that was common following life-threatening experiences. However, none of them had sustained serious physical injuries, and their overall medical condition was stable. The psychological impact of the bear encounter was more complex and would require longer-term attention and support. Olivia, in particular, was experiencing symptoms that suggested the beginning of post-traumatic stress response, including difficulty concentrating, emotional numbness, and recurring vivid memories of the bear's charge and the moment when she had believed she was about to be killed. These symptoms were normal reactions to life-threatening trauma, but they required careful monitoring and professional support to prevent them from developing into more serious, long-term psychological problems. The immediate aftermath of the bear encounter also required extensive communication with Norwegian authorities, international emergency services, and the research institutions that sponsored the team's work in Svalbard. The death of a polar bear, even in self-defense, was a serious matter that required official investigation and documentation, as polar bears were protected under international agreements and Norwegian law. The research team would need to provide detailed statements about the circumstances of the encounter and the actions they had taken to avoid lethal force before shooting the animal. Additionally, the bear encounter had implications for the ongoing research program at Ny-Ålesund, as it demonstrated that the current safety protocols, while generally effective, might need to be revised in light of changing bear behavior patterns that appeared to be related to climate change and alterations in traditional food sources. The incident would likely result in stricter limitations on outdoor activities and additional safety requirements that could significantly impact the team's ability to conduct field research during the remainder of their time in Svalbard. The international media attention that the bear encounter would inevitably attract was also a concern for the research team and their sponsoring institutions. Polar bear attacks were relatively rare events that generated significant public interest, particularly when they involved international research teams working on climate change studies in the Arctic. The team would need to manage media inquiries carefully to ensure that accurate information was provided while protecting their privacy and maintaining focus on their important scientific work. In the hours immediately following the bear encounter, the research station became a hub of intense activity as team members worked to document the incident, communicate with authorities and emergency services, and provide support for the expedition members who had experienced the traumatic event. The close-knit community that had formed around their shared scientific mission found itself dealing with a crisis that tested their ability to support each other through a life-threatening emergency and its aftermath. Dr. Henrik Andersen, as station director, took responsibility for coordinating the official response to the incident, working with Norwegian authorities to arrange for the investigation of the bear's death and ensure that all legal requirements were met. He also worked to maintain the research station's operational capability and ensure that the bear encounter did not completely disrupt the important scientific work that the team was conducting. The other team members rallied around Olivia, James, Anna, and Lars to provide emotional support and practical assistance during their recovery from the traumatic experience. Dr. Maria Santos, with her warm personality and natural empathy, proved particularly effective at helping the expedition members process their emotions and begin to cope with the psychological impact of their near-death experience. As evening approached on November 8, 2024, the research station had settled into a tense quiet that reflected the profound impact that the bear encounter had had on the entire team. The howling Arctic wind continued outside, but the sound now seemed different, more ominous, as if it carried the reminder that they were living and working in an environment that was fundamentally hostile to human survival and where death could arrive without warning in the form of one of nature's most perfect predators. The dead polar bear remained at the sampling site, slowly being covered by drifting snow as the storm continued through the night. Wildlife authorities from Longyearbyen would need to investigate the site once weather conditions permitted helicopter operations, but the bear's death marked the end of one chapter in the ongoing story of human attempts to study and understand the rapidly changing Arctic environment. For Olivia Bennett, the bear encounter would become a defining moment that fundamentally changed her relationship with the Arctic environment and her understanding of the risks inherent in polar research. The woman who had awakened that morning as a dedicated climate scientist focused on atmospheric research would go to sleep that night as a survivor of one of the Arctic's most dangerous predators, carrying memories and experiences that would influence the rest of her scientific career and her personal life. The broader implications of the encounter extended far beyond the immediate trauma experienced by the research team. The incident highlighted the increasing frequency of polar bear encounters with humans as climate change continued to alter traditional bear behavior patterns and force these massive predators into closer contact with human settlements and research facilities. The bear that had been killed was a victim of the same climate changes that the research team was studying, forced to range farther from its traditional hunting grounds as sea ice formation became increasingly unpredictable and unstable. The scientific equipment that had been abandoned during the bear encounter represented months of work and thousands of dollars in specialized instruments, but its loss was insignificant compared to the potential human tragedy that had been narrowly averted. The atmospheric samples that Olivia and her team had been collecting when they encountered the bear would eventually contribute to humanity's understanding of climate change and its impacts on polar regions. But the knowledge gained came at the cost of a direct confrontation with one of the consequences of those same climate changes. As the research team settled in for another night of Arctic darkness, they carried with them a renewed appreciation for both the beauty and the danger of the environment in which they had chosen to work. The polar bear that had died that afternoon had been perfectly adapted to its harsh environment, a magnificent predator that represented millions of years of evolutionary refinement. But it had also been a reminder that humans were visitors in the Arctic, dependent on technology and careful planning for their survival in an environment that remained fundamentally wild and dangerous. The events of November 8, 2024, would be investigated, documented, and analyzed by wildlife experts, emergency services, and research administrators. But for the people who had lived through the encounter, it would remain an intensely personal experience that had tested their preparation, their courage, and their ability to support each other through a life-threatening crisis. The bear encounter had lasted only a few minutes, but its impacts would influence their lives and their work for years to come. In the days that followed, as Norwegian authorities conducted their investigation and international media attention focused on the incident, the research team would gradually return to their routine of scientific observation and data collection. However, the bear encounter had changed them in fundamental ways, giving them a deeper understanding of the risks they faced in their chosen profession, and a greater appreciation for the complex relationship between human scientific endeavors and the natural world they were studying. The polar bear that had been killed in self-defense on November 8, 2024, became part of the scientific record in ways that its death made possible, as tissue samples and biological data collected during the investigation would contribute to ongoing research into polar bear ecology, behavior, and the impacts of climate change on Arctic predator populations. In death, the bear continued to serve the same cause that had brought the research team to Svalbard in the first place: the urgent need to understand and document the changes that were transforming the Arctic environment at an unprecedented pace. For Dr. Olivia Bennett, the bear encounter marked the beginning of a new phase in her career as a polar researcher, one that would be marked by a deeper understanding of the risks and rewards of working in extreme environments and a greater appreciation for the interconnections between scientific research, environmental change, and human survival in some of the world's most challenging environments. The atmospheric data she had been collecting when the bear appeared would eventually contribute to important scientific publications, but the personal experience of facing one of nature's most formidable predators would remain with her as a reminder of the real-world consequences of the climate changes her research was documenting. The story of the November 8, 2024, polar bear encounter at Ny-Ålesund would become part of the larger narrative of human attempts to understand and adapt to climate change in the Arctic, a story that encompassed both the scientific achievements made possible by advanced technology and careful planning, and the fundamental reality that humans remained vulnerable visitors in an environment that was perfectly adapted to exclude their presence. The bear that died that day was both a victim and a symbol of the changes that were transforming the Arctic, and its death served as a stark reminder of the complex relationships between human scientific endeavors and the natural world they sought to understand and protect. In the weeks that followed the bear encounter, as the research team gradually processed the psychological impact of their near-death experience and returned to their routine of scientific work, the incident would become integrated into their understanding of what it meant to be climate researchers working at the edge of human survival. The data they collected, the relationships they formed, and the knowledge they gained would all be influenced by their shared experience of facing one of the Arctic's most dangerous predators and surviving to continue their important work. The polar bear that had been killed on November 8, 2024, represented both the beauty and the danger of the Arctic environment, a perfectly adapted predator that had become an inadvertent victim of the same climate changes that the research team had dedicated their careers to studying and understanding. Its death marked a moment of intersection between human scientific ambition and natural selection, between the quest for knowledge and the struggle for survival, between the abstract world of atmospheric data and the immediate reality of life and death in one of the world's most unforgiving environments. As the Arctic winter continued and the research team adapted to the knowledge that they were living and working in an environment that could kill them without warning, they carried forward the lessons learned from their encounter with one of nature's most formidable predators. The bear that had died would become part of their story, part of their understanding of the Arctic, and part of their contribution to humanity's efforts to understand and respond to the challenges of climate change in polar regions. The events of November 8, 2024, would be remembered not only as a dramatic encounter between humans and wildlife, but as a microcosm of the larger challenges facing researchers working to understand climate change in environments that were becoming increasingly unpredictable and dangerous as traditional patterns of weather, ice formation, and animal behavior were disrupted by rapid environmental change. The polar bear that had been killed that day was both a casualty of those changes and a reminder of the real-world consequences of the scientific work being conducted by research teams around the Arctic. However, the story that began on November 8, 2024, was far from over. The atmospheric samples that Olivia Bennett and her team had been collecting when they encountered the polar bear would eventually contribute to scientific publications that advanced humanity's understanding of climate change in polar regions. The experience of surviving a polar bear attack would influence their future research methodologies, safety protocols, and approach to working in extreme environments. Most importantly, their shared experience of facing death together would strengthen the bonds between team members and deepen their commitment to the scientific work that had brought them to one of the world's most dangerous and beautiful environments. The polar bear that died on November 8, 2024, became part of a larger story about the intersection of human scientific curiosity and natural selection, about the price of knowledge and the value of survival, about the beauty and danger of the Arctic environment, and about the complex relationships between climate change, wildlife behavior, and human activities in polar regions. Its death was both an ending and a beginning, marking the conclusion of one chapter in the ongoing human effort to understand and adapt to environmental change, while opening new questions about the risks and rewards of scientific work in extreme environments. As the research team at Ny-Ålesund continued their important work through the long Arctic winter, they carried with them the memory of November 8, 2024. And the polar bear that had come so close to ending their scientific mission permanently. The bear's death had been necessary for their survival, but it also represented a loss that would influence their understanding of the Arctic environment and their relationship with the wildlife that shared their isolated research outpost. In the end, the encounter with the polar bear became part of their scientific story, part of their personal growth, and part of their contribution to humanity's ongoing effort to understand and protect the natural world in an era of rapid environmental change. The investigation into the November 8, 2024 polar bear incident would eventually conclude that the research team had followed proper safety protocols and that the killing of the bear had been justified as necessary self-defense. However, the incident would also lead to recommendations for enhanced safety procedures, improved communication systems, and additional training for research personnel working in polar bear habitat. The bear's death would contribute to ongoing scientific research into polar bear behavior, population dynamics, and the impacts of climate change on Arctic wildlife, ensuring that its sacrifice would serve the broader cause of conservation and environmental protection. For Dr. Olivia Bennett and her colleagues, the bear encounter would remain a defining experience that influenced their approach to polar research and their understanding of the relationships between human scientific activities and wildlife conservation in rapidly changing Arctic environments. The atmospheric data they had been collecting when the bear appeared would eventually be published in peer-reviewed journals and contribute to international climate change assessments, but the personal experience of surviving a polar bear attack would remain with them as a reminder of the real-world stakes involved in climate research and the personal risks accepted by scientists working to understand and document environmental change in some of the world's most challenging environments. The story of November 8, 2024 thus became part of the larger narrative of human efforts to understand and adapt to climate change in polar regions, a story that encompassed both remarkable scientific achievements and profound personal experiences, both technical advances in atmospheric monitoring and ancient struggles for survival between humans and wildlife, both abstract data about global climate patterns and immediate life-threatening encounters with the consequences of environmental change in the Arctic. The polar bear that died that day became part of that story, a symbol of both the beauty and the danger of the polar environment, and a reminder of the complex relationships between scientific knowledge and personal survival in some of the world's most extreme and rapidly changing environments. The next stories. Grizzly Bear Mauls, 22-year-old TikToker filming video, May 9, 2024. The morning sun cast long shadows across the granite faces of Yosemite Valley as Chloe Marie Ramirez adjusted her ring light for the third time in 10 minutes. At 22, she had built a following of 2.3 million on TikTok with her Wild Adventures with Chloe series, where she documented her hiking trips across America's national parks. Her Instagram account at Chloe's Wild Side boasted another 890,000 followers who eagerly consumed her carefully curated content of pristine wilderness backdrops and motivational captions about finding yourself in nature. What her followers didn't see were the hours of preparation, The multiple takes, the portable battery packs, and the constant pressure to create increasingly dramatic content to maintain her engagement rates. Born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, Chloe had grown up in the sprawling suburbs where the closest thing to wilderness was the artificial lake at Desert Ridge Marketplace. Her father, Miguel Ramirez, worked as a software engineer for American Express, while her mother, Sandra Ramirez née Peterson, managed a dermatology practice in Scottsdale. Neither parent had shown much interest in outdoor activities beyond the occasional resort vacation to Sedona, making Chloe's sudden passion for wilderness adventure somewhat surprising to those who knew her before her social media fame. The transformation had begun during her sophomore year at Arizona State University, where she was studying marketing communications with a minor in digital media. A breakup with her long-term boyfriend, Tyler Morrison, had sent her spiraling into what she later described in her TikToks as her dark era. Seeking something to fill the void, she had impulsively signed up for a weekend camping trip organized by the university's outdoor recreation program. That first trip to Havasu Falls had been a revelation. Despite spending most of the weekend complaining about the heat, the bugs, and the lack of cell service, something about the experience had resonated with her. More importantly, the photos she posted afterward had generated more engagement than anything she had previously shared. Comments poured in from followers impressed by her apparent adventurous spirit, asking for tips about the location and gear recommendations. Sensing an opportunity, Chloe had quickly pivoted her content strategy. Within 6 months, she had transformed from another generic lifestyle influencer into Arizona's premier female adventure content creator. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Chloe's actual outdoor experience remained limited, consisting primarily of well-traveled trails within a few hours of Phoenix. She relied heavily on outdoor recreation Facebook groups and AllTrails reviews to identify photogenic locations that were accessible enough for someone of her fitness level. Her wilderness survival videos were typically filmed at established campgrounds with bathrooms and potable water nearby, though her camera angles and editing carefully concealed these amenities. She had invested heavily in high-end outdoor gear, more for its photogenic qualities than its practical applications. Her backpack alone, a limited-edition collaboration between REI and a popular outdoor lifestyle brand, had cost $400 and was rarely filled with anything more substantial than camera equipment, snacks, and backup phone chargers. The Yosemite trip represented her most ambitious content creation expedition to date. Unlike her typical Arizona day hikes, this would be a 4-day backpacking trip along the High Sierra Camps Loop, culminating in what she had promised her followers would be the most epic sunrise live stream ever from Half Dome's cables. The trip had been planned for months, with Chloe meticulously researching permits, weather conditions, and optimal filming locations. She had even hired a professional photographer, Marcus Chen, a 26-year-old freelancer from San Francisco who specialized in outdoor adventure photography, to accompany her and capture additional content for her Instagram and potential brand partnerships. Marcus had worked with several outdoor influencers over the past 3 years, though none with Chloe's following. Standing 5'10" with an athletic build maintained through regular rock climbing sessions at Planet Granite, he possessed the technical skills and physical fitness that Chloe lacked. His photography portfolio showcased intimate knowledge of California's wilderness areas, from the sea cliffs of Big Sur to the alpine lakes of the Sierra Nevada. Born in Taiwan and raised in Fremont, Marcus had developed his love of nature during family camping trips to places like Yosemite and Lake Tahoe. His parents, both engineers for tech companies in Silicon Valley, had encouraged his artistic pursuits while maintaining practical expectations about his career prospects. Photography remained a side business while he worked full-time as a UX designer for a startup developing outdoor recreation apps. The decision to work with Chloe had been primarily financial. The fee she offered for 4 days of work exceeded what he typically made in a month from his photography business. However, as their planning conversations progressed, Marcus had grown increasingly concerned about Chloe's preparedness for the challenges of multi-day backpacking in Yosemite's backcountry. Her questions revealed fundamental gaps in outdoor knowledge, from proper food storage in bear country to basic navigation skills. When he suggested they start with a less ambitious route to assess her capabilities, Chloe had dismissed his concerns, insisting that her followers expected spectacular content and that she couldn't afford to disappoint them with basic beginner stuff. Joining them for the expedition was Jason Keller, a 24-year-old graduate student in environmental science at UC Berkeley, who had connected with Chloe through mutual friends in the outdoor recreation community. Jason's inclusion in the group was part genuine friendship and part professional interest. He was researching social media's impact on national park visitation patterns for his thesis, and Chloe had agreed to let him document their trip in exchange for his expertise as an experienced backpacker. Standing 6'2" with sandy brown hair and a beard that hadn't seen a razor in 3 months, Jason embodied the outdoorsy aesthetic that Chloe's male followers often aspired to achieve. His parents, both professors at UC Davis, had raised him with a deep appreciation for conservation and environmental stewardship. Unlike Chloe's Instagram-driven motivation, Jason's love of the outdoors was rooted in scientific curiosity and genuine conservation concerns. The fourth member of their group was Emma Rodriguez, Chloe's best friend since high school and the only person in the group with virtually no outdoor experience. At 23, Emma worked as a marketing coordinator for a Phoenix-based fitness influencer management company, a job that had connected her to Chloe's burgeoning social media career. Petite at 5'4" with long black hair, typically styled in beachy waves, Emma served as Chloe's unofficial videographer and social media manager. Her role on the trip would be to help capture behind-the-scenes content and manage Chloe's social media accounts while they were in areas with limited connectivity. Emma's parents, both accountants who had immigrated from El Salvador in the 1980s, viewed her career in social media with skeptical concern, but Emma had found genuine fulfillment in helping her friend build her online presence. The planning for their Yosemite expedition had begun in January 2024, immediately after Chloe's New Year's resolution video, promising her followers bigger adventures and more epic content than ever before. The High Sierra Camps Loop had caught her attention during her research into Yosemite's most photogenic backpacking routes. The trail would take them past iconic landmarks like Half Dome, Cathedral Lakes, and Glen Orlin, providing multiple opportunities for spectacular content creation. More importantly, the loop was serviced by permanent camps with basic amenities, reducing the technical demands of backcountry camping while still providing the appearance of wilderness adventure. Securing permits had required considerable persistence and expense. The online reservation system for popular Yosemite wilderness permits typically sold out within minutes of becoming available, but Chloe had hired a permit acquisition service that specialized in securing hard-to-get reservations for outdoor influencers and their clients. The service charged $500 above the standard permit fees, but Chloe justified the expense as a necessary business cost. The permits were secured for May 6th to 10th, 2024, a time period chosen to maximize the dramatic potential of spring snowmelt waterfalls while avoiding the peak summer crowds that would interfere with filming. Equipment preparation had consumed much of March and April. Chloe's existing outdoor gear collection, while extensive and expensive, was optimized more for aesthetic appeal than functional performance. Her backpack, sleeping bag, and tent had been chosen primarily for their photogenic qualities and brand partnerships rather than their suitability for multi-day backcountry use. Marcus and Jason had both expressed concerns about various pieces of her equipment, from her inadequate sleeping system to her lack of proper water treatment capabilities. However, Chloe had been reluctant to invest in additional gear that wouldn't photograph well or align with her existing brand partnerships. The group's food planning had revealed additional areas of concern. Chloe's typical day hike nutrition consisted of protein bars and electrolyte drinks, provided by her sponsors, supplemented by whatever looked photogenic for her content. Multi-day backpacking required more substantial meal planning, proper calorie calculations, and appropriate food storage systems. Jason had taken the lead on meal planning, designing a menu that would provide adequate nutrition while remaining lightweight and bear-safe. However, Chloe had insisted on modifications to accommodate her content creation needs, including several items chosen more for their visual appeal than their nutritional value. Bear safety had been a particular point of emphasis during their planning discussions. Yosemite's black bear population, while technically less dangerous than grizzly bears, had grown increasingly comfortable around humans due to decades of improper food storage by park visitors. Park regulations required all food, toiletries, and scented items to be stored in approved bear canisters when camping in the backcountry. Marcus and Jason had both invested in high-quality bear canisters and had experience with proper storage protocols, but Chloe's understanding of bear safety remained superficial. Her research had focused primarily on identifying filming locations rather than understanding the ecological and safety considerations of traveling through bear habitat. The group had driven from Phoenix to Yosemite on May 5th, spending the night at the Tenaya Lodge to avoid the pre-dawn departure that would have been required if they had driven directly to the trailhead. The lodge, located just outside the park's southern entrance, provided a comfortable base for final preparations and gear checks. Chloe had spent the evening creating content around their last night of civilization, filming multiple versions of her bedtime routine and morning preparation videos. Emma had managed her social media accounts, responding to comments and building anticipation for the upcoming wilderness adventure. Marcus had used the evening to review weather forecasts and trail conditions, while Jason had conducted final gear inspections and reviewed their planned route. The weather forecast for their 4-day window had been generally favorable, with daytime temperatures in the mid-60s to low 70s and nighttime lows in the upper 30s to low 40s. A weak weather system was expected to move through the area on May 8th, bringing possible afternoon thunderstorms, but conditions were expected to clear by May 9th for their planned half-dome sunrise. Spring snowmelt was near its peak, meaning that water sources would be abundant, but stream crossings might be challenging. The combination of accessible water and moderate temperatures should have created ideal conditions for both hiking and content creation. May 6th dawned clear and cool, with patches of frost visible on the lodge's parking lot as the group loaded their gear into Marcus's Toyota 4Runner for the drive to the trailhead. Chloe had risen at 5:30 a.m. to film her morning routine, featuring her elaborate skincare regimen and the process of getting dressed in her carefully coordinated outdoor outfit. Her clothing choices reflected the ongoing tension between functionality and aesthetics that characterized her entire approach to outdoor activities. She wore leggings from a premium activewear brand that had never been tested in wilderness conditions, a moisture-wicking top that looked great on camera but provided minimal sun protection, and a fleece jacket chosen more for its flattering fit than its insulating properties. The drive from Tenaya Lodge to the Glen All-In trailhead took approximately 45 minutes, winding through the increasingly dramatic landscape of Yosemite's high country. Chloe documented the journey extensively, filming multiple clips of the changing scenery while providing commentary about their upcoming adventure. Her excitement was genuine, if somewhat nervous. Despite her social media persona as an experienced adventurer, this trip represented a significant step beyond her comfort zone. The longest she had previously spent in the wilderness was 2 nights, and never without immediate access to amenities like bathrooms and cell service. The Glen Aulin trailhead parking area was already busy when they arrived at 8:30 a.m., despite the early hour. May was peak season for Yosemite backpacking, and the High Sierra Camps Loop was one of the park's most popular multi-day routes. Marcus found a parking space near the back of the lot, and the group began the process of final gear organization and distribution. The weight distribution in their packs had been a source of ongoing discussion throughout the planning process. Chloe's pack, while expensive and photogenic, was loaded primarily with camera equipment, backup batteries, and content creation supplies. Her share of group gear and personal necessities was minimal compared to what Marcus and Jason were carrying. At 9:15 a.m., after extensive filming of their departure preparations, the group officially began their hike. The Glen Aulin Trail started with a gentle descent through mixed conifer forest, following the Tuolumne River as it carved its way toward the valley floor. The trail was well maintained and heavily traveled, with clear signage and regular mile markers. For the first hour, Chloe maintained an energetic pace while filming frequent updates for her followers. She had planned to post regular content throughout the trip, taking advantage of periodic cell service to upload clips and photos. The group's dynamics became apparent within the first few miles. Marcus moved with the efficient gait of an experienced hiker, his camera equipment integrated seamlessly into his pack system. Jason maintained a steady pace while constantly observing and commenting on the surrounding ecosystem, pointing out plant species, animal tracks, and geological features. Emma struggled initially with the weight of her pack and the unfamiliar sensation of hiking boots, but maintained good spirits while gamely attempting to help with Chloe's content creation. Chloe herself alternated between periods of enthusiastic energy and visible fatigue, her fitness level adequate for day hikes but not optimized for multi-day backpacking with a heavy pack. The first significant landmark on their route was the series of cascades and pools collectively known as White Cascade, approximately 3 miles from the trailhead. The location provided spectacular opportunities for content creation, with multiple vantage points offering views of the rushing water against a backdrop of granite cliffs. Chloe spent nearly an hour at the location, filming multiple versions of her wilderness waterfall content, while Marcus captured additional photos and video clips. The extended photo session put them behind their planned schedule, but the location's dramatic beauty seemed to justify the delay. Emma proved invaluable during these content creation sessions, helping to manage equipment, providing feedback on compositions, and capturing behind-the-scenes footage that would later be edited into Chloe's day-in-the-life content. Her marketing background had given her a good understanding of visual storytelling and audience engagement, even if her outdoor skills remained limited. Jason used these breaks to conduct informal research for his thesis, observing how other hikers reacted to Chloe's filming activities and documenting the locations where content creation was most intensive. The group reached Glen Aulin High Sierra Camp at approximately 1:30 p.m. after covering 6 miles and descending nearly 800 feet in elevation. The camp, situated beside the Tuolumne River at 7,800 feet elevation, consisted of canvas tent cabins arranged around a central dining hall and support facilities. The High Sierra camps represented a unique compromise between wilderness backpacking and traditional camping, providing basic accommodations and meals while requiring hikers to travel between camps on foot through Yosemite's backcountry. For paying guests, the camps offered a bed, 3 meals a day, and basic amenities. For backpackers like Chloe's group, the camps provided potable water, pit toilets, and designated camping areas. Setting up camp at Glen Orlin provided Chloe with extensive content opportunities. She filmed the process of selecting a campsite, setting up her tent, and organizing her gear, providing commentary on backcountry camping essentials. Despite her limited experience with the activities she was demonstrating, Marcus and Jason handled most of the technical aspects of campsite selection and setup, while Chloe focused on creating content. Their campsite was located approximately 100 yards from the main camp facilities, in a designated area for backpackers that provided access to amenities while maintaining the wilderness experience. The afternoon was spent exploring the immediate area around Glen Orlin, with Chloe filming additional content while the group acclimated to their surroundings. The Tuolumne River provided a dramatic backdrop, with multiple cascades and pools offering opportunities for both photography and relaxation. Jason used the time to conduct informal biological surveys, documenting plant species and animal sign while explaining Yosemite's ecosystems to Chloe's camera. His scientific approach to wilderness observation provided educational content that complemented Chloe's adventure-focused narrative. Dinner preparation became an extended content creation session, with Chloe filming the process of using camp stoves, preparing dehydrated meals, and managing food storage in bear country. Jason's meal planning had prioritized nutrition and weight efficiency, but Chloe's documentation focused more on the aesthetic and experiential aspects of backcountry cooking. The resulting content would later be edited into multiple videos showcasing backpacking meal prep and wilderness cooking tips, though viewers wouldn't see the extensive assistance Chloe received from her more experienced companions. As evening approached, the group's attention turned to bear safety protocols. Glen Orlin's location in prime bear habitat required strict adherence to food storage regulations and camp cleanliness standards. Jason led a detailed explanation of proper bear canister use, demonstrating how to secure food, toiletries, and any scented items in the approved containers. The bear canisters had to be placed at least 100 feet from their sleeping area and 50 feet from any water source, positioned away from cliffs or steep slopes where a bear might accidentally knock them over the edge. Chloe filmed extensively during this bear safety tutorial, creating content that would later be edited into educational videos about wilderness safety. However, her attention to Jason's instructions was divided between absorbing the information and managing her filming activities. She had difficulty operating her bear canister's locking mechanism and needed multiple demonstrations before successfully securing her food supplies. Marcus quietly took note of her struggles, mentally preparing to double-check her bear safety protocols throughout the trip. The first night's camp routine established patterns that would continue throughout their expedition. Chloe spent considerable time each evening editing and uploading content, taking advantage of whatever cell service was available to maintain her social media presence. Emma assisted with this process while managing comments and engagement across Chloe's various platforms. Marcus reviewed his photos and planned shooting locations for the following day, while Jason documented observations in his research journal and reviewed maps and weather forecasts. Sleep came fitfully for most of the group on their first night in the wilderness. Chloe's sleeping system, while expensive and photogenic, provided inadequate insulation for the cool mountain temperatures. Her sleeping bag was rated for temperatures no lower than 40 degrees Fahrenheit, barely adequate for the conditions they were experiencing. Emma struggled with similar temperature challenges, having relied on Chloe's gear recommendations rather than conducting independent research. Marcus and Jason, with their more extensive outdoor experience, had brought appropriate sleeping systems and remained comfortable throughout the night. May 7th began with the alarm on Chloe's phone, sounding at 6 a.m., earlier than her usual wake-up time but necessary to accommodate the day's planned activities. The morning routine became another extended content creation session, with Chloe filming her backcountry morning routine, while Emma captured behind-the-scenes footage. The process of breaking camp, preparing breakfast, and organizing gear for the day's hike was documented extensively, though the actual work was largely handled by Marcus and Jason, while Chloe focused on creating content. The day's planned route would take them from Glen Aulin to May Lake High Sierra Camp, covering approximately 8 miles with a net elevation gain of nearly 1,500 feet. The trail would lead them through some of Yosemite's most spectacular high-country terrain, including views of iconic landmarks like Half Dome and Cathedral Range. The distance and elevation gain represented a significant increase in difficulty compared to their previous day's hike, but Chloe had insisted on the route for its content creation potential. Departure from Glen Aulin was delayed by nearly an hour as Chloe worked to create the perfect leaving camp content, filming multiple versions of her morning commentary while the rest of the group waited with increasing impatience. Marcus finally intervened, pointing out that their late start would put them at risk of afternoon thunderstorms that were forecast for later in the day. The potential weather concerns were real, but Marcus was also growing frustrated with the constant delays caused by Chloe's filming activities. The trail from Glen Aulin climbed steadily through mixed forest before emerging into the granite domes and alpine meadows that characterized Yosemite's high country. As they gained elevation, the vegetation transitioned from dense forest to sparse alpine plants adapted to harsh mountain conditions. The scenery was spectacular, providing numerous opportunities for dramatic content creation, but the increased elevation gain and thinner air began to take a toll on Chloe's energy levels. By mid-morning, Chloe was showing signs of fatigue that went beyond her usual social media documentation of wilderness challenges. Her pace slowed significantly, and she began requiring more frequent rest breaks. Emma, despite her own struggles with the physical demands of backpacking, remained supportive and encouraging. Marcus and Jason exchanged concerned glances, but avoided direct confrontation, understanding that Chloe's pride and social media image were both at stake. The group reached Tenaya Lake at approximately noon, providing a dramatic setting for extended photography and content creation. The lake, situated at 8,150 feet elevation, was surrounded by smooth granite domes that rose directly from the water's edge. The stark beauty of the high alpine environment provided perfect backdrops for Chloe's adventure content, but the location also marked the beginning of more challenging terrain ahead. Lunch at Tenaya Lake became an extended break as Chloe worked to create multiple pieces of content while recovering from the morning's exertion. She filmed eating sequences, gear organization tutorials, and landscape appreciation videos, while Emma managed equipment and provided filming assistance. Marcus used the break to scout photography locations and assess weather conditions, noting the development of clouds that suggested the predicted afternoon thunderstorms might arrive earlier than forecast. Jason's research observations during the break focused on the environmental impact of social media-driven visitation to wilderness areas. Tenaya Lake showed clear signs of heavy use, from trampled vegetation around the shoreline to multiple social trails leading to popular photography locations. The location's dramatic beauty made it a magnet for social media content creators, but the concentrated impact was beginning to show in the form of ecological degradation. These observations would later form a significant component of his thesis research. The afternoon segment of their hike took them through increasingly rugged terrain as they climbed toward the Cathedral Range. The trail became steeper and more technical, requiring careful attention to route finding and footing. Chloe's fatigue became more apparent, and her usually enthusiastic commentary grew strained. Marcus began to worry about their pace and the approaching weather, but Chloe insisted on continuing, despite suggestions that they consider alternative camping options. At approximately 2:30 p.m., The group encountered their first significant wildlife of the trip when a mule deer doe and her twin fawns crossed the trail about 50 yards ahead of them. The encounter provided perfect content opportunities, but it also demonstrated the challenges of balancing wildlife photography with appropriate safety protocols. Chloe immediately began filming, moving closer to get better footage, despite Jason's warnings about maintaining safe distances from wildlife. The deer tolerated her presence initially, but eventually moved off into the forest when her approach became too aggressive. The wildlife encounter prompted a discussion about animal safety that would prove prophetic given later events. Jason explained the importance of maintaining appropriate distances from all wildlife, emphasizing that even seemingly harmless animals like deer could become aggressive if they felt threatened or cornered. He also discussed bear safety protocols, reviewing the procedures they had practiced the previous evening. Chloe filmed portions of this discussion for educational content, but her attention remained divided between learning the information and creating engaging footage. Weather conditions began deteriorating around 3 p.m. as the predicted thunderstorm system moved into the area. Initially, the changing conditions provided dramatic lighting for photography, with dark clouds creating stark contrasts against the granite landscape. Marcus captured stunning images of the approaching storm, while Chloe filmed commentary about wilderness weather challenges. However, as the first drops of rain began to fall, the aesthetic appeal quickly gave way to practical concerns about safety and equipment protection. The group took shelter under a large boulder overhang as the storm intensified, providing temporary protection from rain and wind. The delay was frustrating given their already behind-schedule progress, but the lightning activity made continuing travel dangerous until the storm passed. Chloe used the enforced break to create wilderness survival content, filming herself explaining shelter selection and storm safety while demonstrating her rain gear and equipment protection strategies. The thunderstorm lasted approximately 45 minutes, dumping nearly an inch of rain and creating temporary streams across the normally dry granite surfaces. When travel conditions finally improved, the group found themselves facing slippery rock surfaces and muddy trail conditions that further slowed their progress. Chloe's hiking boots, chosen more for their photogenic appeal than their technical performance, provided inadequate traction on the wet granite surfaces. Emma struggled with similar equipment limitations, requiring assistance from Marcus and Jason on several technical sections. The delayed arrival at May Lake High Sierra Camp occurred just before sunset, after a day that had covered nearly 9 miles with over 1,800 feet of elevation gain. The camp, situated beside May Lake at 9,270 feet elevation, provided spectacular views of surrounding peaks, but also represented the highest elevation any member of their group had previously camped. The thinner air and cooler temperatures created additional challenges for Chloe and Emma, both of whom were showing signs of altitude-related fatigue. Setting up camp at May Lake required more careful attention to weather protection than their previous night's camp. The higher elevation and recent storm activity created conditions that were both colder and more exposed than they had previously experienced. Marcus and Jason assisted with selecting a protected campsite and ensuring that all equipment was properly secured against potential wind and precipitation. Chloe filmed the campsite selection process, but relied heavily on her companion's expertise for the actual decision-making. The evening meal preparation at May Lake became complicated by the effects of higher elevation on both cooking equipment and human physiology. Camp stoves operated less efficiently at the reduced air pressure, requiring longer cooking times and more fuel consumption. Chloe and Emma both experienced mild altitude-related symptoms, including headaches and reduced appetite that made eating the necessary calories more challenging. Jason monitored both women carefully, recognizing the potential for altitude sickness to develop into more serious conditions if not properly managed. Bear safety protocols at May Lake required even greater vigilance due to the area's history of aggressive bear encounters. The lake's remote location and limited human presence had created conditions where bears were less habituated to humans but potentially more dangerous when encounters did occur. Jason emphasized the importance of perfect compliance with food storage regulations, noting that any mistakes could have serious consequences for both their group and future visitors to the area. The second night's sleep was even more challenging than the first, with temperatures dropping into the mid-30s and wind gusts rattling their tents throughout the night. Chloe's inadequate sleeping system left her shivering and exhausted, though she attempted to maintain her social media documentation of the authentic wilderness experience. Emma fared slightly better with borrowed insulation from Marcus, but both women were clearly struggling with the cumulative effects of physical exertion, sleep deprivation, and altitude exposure. May 8th brought clearer skies, but also the most challenging day of their planned itinerary. The route from May Lake to Sunrise High Sierra Camp would cover approximately 10 miles with significant elevation changes, including a traverse below the dramatic granite faces of the Cathedral Range. The day would also include their closest approach to Half Dome, providing opportunities for the spectacular content that Chloe had promised her followers, but also presenting the most technically demanding hiking they had yet attempted. Morning preparation took longer than usual, as both Chloe and Emma struggled with fatigue and mild altitude symptoms. Chloe's usually energetic social media documentation was more subdued, though she attempted to maintain her enthusiastic persona for her audience. Marcus and Jason handled most of the camp breakdown and gear organization, while providing supportive encouragement for their struggling companions. The trail from May Lake began with a steep descent through dense forest, before emerging into the high alpine environment surrounding Cathedral Lakes. The dramatic granite spires of the Cathedral Range provided spectacular backdrops for photography, but the technical demands of the trail required constant attention to safety and route finding. Chloe's fatigue was becoming a significant concern, with frequent rest breaks necessary to maintain forward progress. At Cathedral Lakes, approximately 4 miles into the day's hike, the group encountered a situation that would later be recognized as a critical decision point. Chloe was clearly struggling with the physical demands of the route, and weather conditions were again showing signs of potential afternoon thunderstorm development. Marcus and Jason quietly discussed the possibility of altering their planned route to reduce the day's difficulty, but Chloe insisted on continuing toward Half Dome, despite their concerns. The decision to continue would later be analyzed extensively by park officials, search and rescue personnel, and media commentators examining the events that followed. Multiple factors influenced the choice, including Chloe's social media commitments to her followers, the group's investment in their planned itinerary, and the difficulty of securing alternative permits for future attempts. However, the most significant factor was probably Chloe's determination to maintain her social media image as an accomplished wilderness adventurer despite her growing awareness of her own limitations. The approach to Half Dome from Cathedral Lakes provided increasingly dramatic views of Yosemite's most iconic landmark, but it also led the group into more remote and technically challenging terrain. The trail became less distinct, requiring navigation skills that tested the group's outdoor experience. Jason took the lead on route finding, while Marcus managed photography opportunities and monitored the physical condition of both women in their group. Wildlife sign became more abundant as they moved into the remote terrain near Half Dome's base. Jason pointed out numerous examples of bear tracks, scat and feeding sign, emphasizing that they were entering prime bear habitat where encounters were increasingly likely. The educational content was valuable for Chloe's audience, but it also served as a practical reminder of the safety protocols they needed to maintain. Bear canisters were checked and rechecked, camp cleanliness procedures were reviewed, and noise-making strategies were practiced to avoid surprising any bears they might encounter. At approximately 1 p.m. on May 8th, the group reached the area that would later be designated as Location Alpha in the official incident reports. The site was located roughly 1.2 miles northeast of Half Dome's summit, at an elevation of approximately 8,400 feet. The location offered spectacular views of Half Dome's north face, while providing a relatively flat area suitable for rest and photography. More significantly, from a wildlife perspective, the site was situated near a natural corridor that bears used for traveling between feeding areas on either side of the Granite Ridge system. Chloe immediately recognized the location's potential for content creation and began setting up for what she planned as an extended photography and filming session. The dramatic granite landscape and iconic views of Half Dome provided perfect backdrops for the climactic content of their wilderness adventure. Emma assisted with equipment setup while Marcus scouted photography angles, and Jason continued his research documentation. The scene appeared perfect for creating the spectacular content that would justify their entire expedition. Unknown to the group, they were being observed from approximately 300 yards away by a large male black bear that wildlife officials would later designate as Bear YNP 2024-47. The bear, estimated to weigh between 400 and 450 pounds, was a mature adult that had been documented in the area for at least 3 years. Park wildlife records indicated several previous encounters between this bear and park visitors, including 2 incidents in 2023, where the bear had obtained human food after successful raids on improperly stored supplies. Bear YNP 2024-47 had been foraging in the area throughout the morning, taking advantage of seasonal food sources that included white-bark pine nuts, manzanita berries, and various insects and grubs. The bear's behavior suggested a well-established territorial familiarity with the location, indicating that the area represented part of his regular feeding circuit. More concerning from a safety perspective, the bear showed signs of habituation to human presence, including a lack of the wariness that typically characterizes black bears in wilderness areas. The bear's initial observation of Chloe's group was consistent with typical black bear behavior when encountering humans in their territory. Rather than immediately fleeing, as would be expected from bears with limited human contact, Bear YNP 2024-47 remained in position while assessing the potential threat and opportunity represented by the human presence. His behavior during this initial observation period would later be analyzed by wildlife experts as showing several concerning indicators of problematic habituation. At 1:15 p.m., Chloe began what she planned as a live stream broadcast to her TikTok followers, promising them an exclusive real-time tour of the most epic wilderness location ever. The live stream was scheduled to last approximately 30 minutes, during which she would showcase the dramatic landscape, demonstrate wilderness skills, and interact with viewer comments. The broadcast represented the culmination of her expedition planning, providing the spectacular content that would justify the entire trip's investment of time, money, and effort. Marcus positioned himself approximately 20 feet away from Chloe to capture complimentary photography and video during her live stream. Emma managed additional camera equipment and monitored chat comments on Chloe's various social media platforms. Jason used the opportunity to document the content creation process for his research, while maintaining his usual awareness of their wilderness environment. The group's attention was focused primarily on creating and managing content, rather than maintaining the environmental awareness that wilderness safety protocols required. The live stream began with Chloe's characteristic enthusiasm, showcasing the dramatic granite landscape while providing commentary about their wilderness adventure. Viewer engagement was immediately high, with hundreds of comments appearing within the first few minutes of the broadcast. The spectacular setting and professional quality visuals created exactly the kind of content that had built Chloe's following, validating her decision to undertake the challenging expedition despite her limited wilderness experience. At 1:23 p.m., approximately 8 minutes into the live stream, Jason noticed movement in the peripheral forest approximately 200 yards from their location. His initial observation suggested a large animal, though the dense vegetation and granite boulder fields made positive identification difficult. Jason's wilderness experience had developed his ability to detect wildlife presence through subtle environmental cues, but the distance and terrain made it impossible to determine whether they were observing a deer, bear, or other large mammal. Jason's attempt to alert the group to the potential wildlife presence was initially unsuccessful due to their focus on content creation activities. Chloe was engaged with viewer comments while maintaining her enthusiastic commentary about their wilderness location. Marcus was concentrating on capturing dramatic photographs that would complement the live stream content. Emma was managing multiple devices while monitoring social media engagement across several platforms. The group's attention was divided among multiple electronic devices and content creation tasks, rather than focused on their immediate environment. At 1:26 p.m., Bear YNP 2024-47 moved closer to the group's location, approaching to within approximately 150 yards while remaining concealed behind granite boulders and dense vegetation. The bear's approach pattern suggested curious investigation rather than predatory stalking, but wildlife experts would later note that the distinction between these behaviors could be difficult to determine in real-time wilderness encounters. The bear's willingness to approach humans within such close proximity indicated problematic habituation that created dangerous conditions for both the bear and any humans in the area. Jason finally succeeded in getting Marcus's attention at 1:27 p.m., pointing toward the area where he had observed movement while making subtle gestures to avoid alarming Chloe during her live broadcast. Marcus immediately understood the potential seriousness of the situation and began scanning the indicated area with his telephoto lens, using his camera equipment to get a closer look at whatever wildlife might be present. Within moments, Marcus confirmed Jason's observation, clearly identifying a large black bear moving through the granite boulder field in their general direction. The presence of a large bear within 150 yards of their location created an immediate safety emergency that required careful management to avoid escalating the encounter into a dangerous confrontation. Standard bear safety protocols called for the group to make their presence known to the bear while avoiding sudden movements or loud noises that might startle the animal. However, these protocols conflicted directly with Chloe's ongoing live stream, which had attracted over 3,000 viewers who were expecting continued entertainment rather than a wildlife safety emergency. Marcus faced a critical decision about whether to immediately interrupt Chloe's live stream or attempt to manage the bear encounter without disrupting her broadcast. The decision was complicated by several factors, including the uncertain intentions of the bear, the potential for viewer panic if the situation was handled poorly, and Chloe's likely reaction to having her important content creation interrupted by what might turn out to be a false alarm. Marcus's wildlife experience suggested that many bear encounters resolved peacefully if handled correctly, making immediate panic potentially more dangerous than careful monitoring. At 1:28 p.m., Marcus made the decision to quietly alert Emma to the bear presence while continuing to monitor the situation through his camera lens. Emma's reaction was immediate alarm, though she attempted to avoid disrupting Chloe's broadcast while processing the implications of a large bear approaching their location. Emma's lack of wilderness experience made her uncertain about appropriate responses, but her marketing background helped her understand the potential impact on Chloe's brand and followers if the situation was handled poorly. Bear YNP 2024-47 continued his approach, moving to within approximately 100 yards of the group while showing increased interest in their activities. The bear's behavior remained consistent with curiosity rather than aggression, but wildlife experts would later emphasize that this distinction provided little comfort given the unpredictable nature of bear behavior and the serious consequences of any physical encounter. The bear's body language showed alert attention to the group without obvious signs of stress or agitation, but also without the wariness that would indicate appropriate wild animal behavior. At 1:30 p.m., Jason joined Marcus and Emma in their quiet conference about the approaching bear, while Chloe remained focused on her livestream interaction with viewers. The three experienced a moment of collective uncertainty about the best course of action, weighing the potential dangers of immediate evacuation against the risks of continuing their activities while hoping the bear would lose interest and move away. Their decision-making was complicated by responsibility for Chloe's safety, despite her lack of awareness of the situation developing around her. The bear's approach continued steadily, bringing him to within approximately 75 yards of the group by 1:31 p.m. At this distance, the bear was clearly visible to all members of the group except Chloe, whose attention remained focused on her live-stream activities and viewer engagement. Marcus began making subtle preparations for emergency response, including checking the accessibility of their bear spray and identifying potential escape routes that would allow the group to retreat to more defensible positions if the encounter escalated. At 1:32 p.m., Bear YNP 2024-47 emerged from behind a large granite boulder, becoming fully visible at a distance of approximately 60 yards from Chloe's livestream location. The bear's size was immediately apparent, with his massive frame and distinctive coat coloring, making him an impressive and intimidating presence in the mountain landscape. More concerning than his size was his behavior, which showed none of the natural wariness that characterizes healthy black bears in wilderness encounters with humans. Jason made the decision at 1:33 p.m. to interrupt Chloe's livestream, approaching her while speaking in calm, measured tones designed to avoid startling either Chloe or the bear. "Chloe, we need you to slowly and calmly wrap up your stream. There's a large bear about 60 yards away, and we need to follow safety protocols." His words were carefully chosen to convey urgency without creating panic, but they immediately transformed the dynamic of both the live stream and the wildlife encounter. Chloe's initial reaction was disbelief mixed with excitement about the content opportunity that a bear encounter might provide. "Are you serious? This is perfect. My followers are going to absolutely lose their minds." Her response reflected both her inexperience with wilderness dangers and her instinctive prioritization of content creation over safety considerations. The livestream viewers immediately picked up on the conversation, with comment volume spiking as hundreds of people began asking about the bear and demanding to see footage of the wildlife encounter. Marcus attempted to reinforce Jason's message while maintaining visual contact with the bear through his camera lens. "Chloe, this is a serious safety situation. We need to slowly back away from this location and give the bear space to pass through the area. His voice carried the authority of wilderness experience, but Chloe's excitement about the content opportunity made her resistant to following safety protocols that would end her successful live stream. At 1:34 p.m., Bear YNP 2024-47 moved closer, approaching to within approximately 45 yards of the group. The bear's behavior remained curious rather than obviously aggressive, but wildlife experts would later emphasize that black bears could transition from curious to dangerous with little warning. The bear's continued approach, despite the presence and activity of humans, indicated problematic habituation that created unpredictable and potentially dangerous conditions. Emma attempted to support Jason and Marcus while managing the technical aspects of Chloe's live stream, which was generating increasingly frantic comments from viewers who were beginning to understand that a real wildlife encounter was developing. The viewer engagement was extraordinary, with over 5,000 people watching live and comment volume making it impossible to track individual messages. Many viewers were encouraging Chloe to show them the bear, while others were expressing concern for the group's safety. Chloe's decision at 1:35 p.m. to continue her live stream while attempting to incorporate the bear encounter into her content would later be analyzed extensively by wildlife experts, social media researchers, and emergency response personnel. Her choice reflected the complex incentives created by social media fame, where spectacular content could generate career-defining engagement while also creating serious personal risks. The decision also demonstrated the gap between her social media persona as an experienced wilderness adventurer and her actual understanding of wildlife safety. Guys, you're not going to believe this, but there's actually a huge bear here with us right now, Chloe announced to her live stream audience while slowly turning her phone's camera toward the bear's location. The movement was gradual and deliberate, following Jason's urgent instructions to avoid sudden motions that might startle the animal. However, her decision to continue broadcasting and to attempt filming the bear directly contradicted established wildlife safety protocols. Bear YNP 2024-47 was clearly visible in Chloe's live stream footage as she panned her camera across the granite landscape. The bear appeared massive, even at a distance of 40 yards, with his dark coat and powerful frame, creating an impressive and intimidating presence. More concerning to wildlife experts, who would later analyze the footage, was the bear's body language, which showed alert interest in the group's activities without the defensive posturing that might indicate aggressive intentions or the wariness that would suggest appropriate wild animal behavior. The live stream audience reaction was immediate and intense, with viewer numbers spiking above 8,000 as word of the bear encounter spread across social media platforms. Comments ranged from excitement and encouragement to show more footage, to serious warnings about the dangers of bear encounters, to jokes and memes about the situation. The volume and intensity of viewer engagement created pressure for Chloe to continue providing spectacular content despite the obvious safety risks. At 1:36 p.m., Marcus made the decision to begin slowly backing away from their current location while maintaining visual contact with the bear. His movement was deliberate and controlled, following established protocols for managing bear encounters through gradual retreat rather than sudden flight that might trigger chase instincts. Marcus's wilderness experience had included previous bear encounters, giving him confidence in the appropriate response procedures, but he was also aware that no bear encounter was entirely predictable. Jason supported Marcus's retreat movement while continuing to monitor Bear YNP 2024-47's behavior for signs of escalation or increased aggression. The bear's response to the group's movement would provide critical information about his intentions and the likelihood of peaceful resolution. Jason's academic knowledge of bear behavior complemented Marcus's practical experience, creating a foundation for appropriate decision-making during the evolving encounter. Emma remained focused on Chloe and the technical aspects of managing the live stream, though her anxiety about the situation was becoming increasingly apparent. Her lack of wilderness experience made her uncertain about appropriate responses, but her instinctive understanding of dangerous situations told her that continuing to film was probably not the best choice. Emma's marketing background also made her aware of the potential reputational consequences for Chloe if the situation was handled poorly or resulted in negative outcomes. Chloe's response to her companion's retreat was initially resistant, as she was reluctant to end what had become the most engaging live stream of her career. The viewer engagement was extraordinary, with participation levels that exceeded anything she had previously achieved. The potential for viral content was obvious, and the career benefits of spectacular footage could be enormous. However, the increasing urgency in her companions' voices was beginning to override her content creation instincts. At 1:37 p.m., Bear YNP 2024-47 showed the first signs of increased interest in the group's activities, raising his head higher and orientating directly toward their location. The behavioral change was subtle but significant, representing a transition from passive awareness to active attention that increased the potential for escalation. Wildlife experts would later identify this moment as critical in the development of the encounter, when appropriate human response might still have resulted in peaceful resolution. Jason recognized the significance of the bear's behavioral change and increased the urgency of his communication with Chloe. "We need to move away from this location right now. This is not optional." His voice carried authority that reflected both his wilderness experience and his academic understanding of predator behavior. The combination of practical knowledge and scientific training gave him confidence in assessing the developing danger, even though every bear encounter remained inherently unpredictable. Marcus began implementing more aggressive retreat procedures, increasing the distance between the group and the bear, while maintaining the slow, deliberate movements that avoided triggering chase instincts. His photography equipment provided a valuable tool for monitoring the bear's behavior at distance, allowing him to track changes in body language and orientation that might indicate escalating aggression. Marcus's experience with wildlife photography had taught him to read animal behavior cues that were invisible to most people. At 1:38 p.m., Chloe finally began to understand the seriousness of the situation as her companion's urgency became unmistakable. Her wilderness inexperience had initially made her assume that bear encounters were manageable and potentially beneficial for content creation, but the obvious alarm of her more experienced companions was beginning to override her social media instincts. The decision to end her live stream was difficult, given the extraordinary engagement levels, but safety concerns were finally taking priority. "Okay, guys, I think we're going to have to cut this stream short because of our wildlife friend here," Chloe announced to her audience while beginning to follow her companion's retreat movements. Her tone remained artificially cheerful for her viewers, but underlying tension was becoming apparent in her voice. The live stream audience reacted with disappointment and demands to continue filming, but also with increasing expressions of concern for the group's safety. Bear YNP 2024-47's response to the group's retreat was to move closer, approaching to within approximately 30 yards, while maintaining his focused attention on their activities. The bear's behavior remained curious rather than obviously aggressive, but the reduced distance created increasingly dangerous conditions regardless of the animal's current intentions. Wildlife experts would later emphasize that bear behavior could change rapidly and unpredictably, making close encounters extremely dangerous even when initial signs seemed relatively benign. At 1:39 p.m., The bear's behavior shifted significantly as he began moving more purposefully toward the group's location. The change from casual approach to direct movement indicated escalating interest that created immediate danger for all members of the group. Jason immediately recognized the behavioral transition and began implementing emergency protocols, including preparation of bear spray and identification of defensive positions among the granite boulder fields. Marcus continued documenting the encounter through his camera equipment while managing his own retreat, capturing footage that would later prove valuable for both wildlife research and incident investigation. His ability to maintain photographic documentation while managing personal safety reflected both his professional experience and his understanding of the situation's potential significance. The images and video captured during these critical moments would provide researchers with rare documentation of bear behavior during escalating human encounters. Chloe's live stream continued recording despite her growing awareness of the danger, creating a real-time record of the encounter that would be viewed by millions of people within hours of the incident. The live stream audience had grown to over 12,000 viewers as news of the bear encounter spread across social media platforms, with viewer engagement reaching levels that exceeded anything in Chloe's previous content creation experience. The extraordinary audience attention created additional pressure to continue filming despite obvious safety risks. At 1:40 p.m., Bear YNP 2024-47 moved to within approximately 20 yards of the group, close enough that individual features like scars and distinctive markings were clearly visible. The bear's massive size became more apparent at close range, with his estimated weight of 400 to 450 pounds, creating an intimidating and potentially lethal presence. More concerning than his size was his behavior, which continued to show problematic habituation and lack of appropriate wariness around humans. Jason made the decision to deploy bear spray, removing the canister from his pack while maintaining visual contact with the approaching bear. Bear spray represented their most effective defense against a close encounter, but effective use required proper timing and positioning to create a barrier between the bear and the human targets. Jason's experience with bear safety protocols provided confidence in using the spray effectively, but he also understood that deployment would likely end any possibility of peaceful resolution. The decision to prepare bear spray created a critical moment in the encounter. As the group transitioned from retreat and avoidance to active defensive preparations, Marcus and Emma immediately understood the significance of Jason's action and began implementing their own emergency procedures, including identifying defensive positions and escape routes among the granite boulder formations. Chloe's inexperience made her less aware of the implications, but her companion's obvious alarm was finally overriding her content creation instincts. At 1:41 p.m., Bear YNP 2024-47 paused his approach, standing approximately 18 yards from the group while assessing their defensive preparations. The bear's response to Jason's bear spray preparation would later be analyzed by wildlife experts as indicating previous negative experiences with humans, suggesting that this bear had encountered defensive measures during previous confrontations. However, rather than retreating, as would be expected from a bear with appropriate wariness, Bear YNP 2024-47 remained in position while apparently evaluating his options. Chloe's live stream audience was experiencing the encounter in real time, with over 15,000 viewers watching as the situation developed. Comments were arriving at a rate that made individual messages impossible to track, with reactions ranging from excitement and encouragement to serious concern and advice about bear safety. Many viewers were taking screenshots and recording the live stream, creating permanent records of the encounter that would be distributed across multiple social media platforms within minutes. The bear's pause at 18 yards created a temporary standoff that provided both opportunity and increased tension. Jason maintained his bear spray in ready position while continuing to assess the bear's behavior for signs of escalation or retreat. Marcus used the pause to capture additional documentation while preparing his own defensive measures. Emma remained focused on Chloe, while managing the technical aspects of the live stream that was documenting the entire encounter. At 1:42 p.m., the standoff was broken when Bear YNP 2024-47 resumed his approach, moving with increased purpose toward the group's location. The bear's movement pattern indicated escalating interest that created immediate danger for all group members. Jason's wildlife knowledge and wilderness experience told him that the encounter had progressed beyond the point where peaceful resolution was likely, making defensive action necessary for the group's survival. "Everyone get behind me and prepare to run toward those rocks if I tell you to," Jason instructed while raising his bear spray to deployment position. His voice carried calm authority despite the obvious danger, providing leadership that the group desperately needed. Marcus immediately understood and complied with Jason's instructions while continuing to document the encounter. Emma moved to support Chloe while managing the live stream equipment that was capturing everything in real time. Bear YNP 2024-47 continued his approach, closing to within approximately 12 yards of the group. At this distance, the bear's size and power were intimidating, with his massive frame and distinctive features clearly visible to both the group and the live stream audience. The bear's behavior showed continued curiosity mixed with increasing boldness, a combination that wildlife experts would later identify as extremely dangerous regardless of the animal's immediate intentions. At 1:43 p.m., Chloe made a decision that would later be analyzed extensively by investigators, wildlife experts, and social media researchers. Rather than following her companion's defensive positioning, she stepped forward with her phone to capture better footage of the approaching bear. Her movement was motivated by a combination of inexperience with wilderness dangers and instinctive prioritization of content creation opportunities. The decision would have immediate and tragic consequences for both Chloe and the bear. "Chloe, get back here right now!" Marcus shouted as he realized what she was doing. His voice carried genuine alarm as he understood the dangerous implications of her movement toward the bear. Jason simultaneously prepared to deploy bear spray while positioning himself to protect Chloe if the bear's behavior escalated further. Emma watched in horrified fascination as her best friend made a decision that seemed obviously dangerous, even to her inexperienced perspective. Bear YNP 2024-47's response to Chloe's forward movement was immediate and decisive. The bear interpreted her approach as either a challenge or an indication of opportunity, triggering behaviors that transformed a dangerous but manageable encounter into an immediate life-threatening emergency. Wildlife experts would later note that Chloe's movement violated every established protocol for bear encounters, creating conditions that made aggressive response almost inevitable. At 1:44 p.m., the bear charged. The attack began with Bear YNP 2024-47 covering the remaining distance to Chloe in approximately 2.3 seconds, moving at a speed that made human reaction impossible. Black bears can reach speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour, faster than any human can run, making escape impossible once a charge begins. Chloe's forward position had eliminated any possibility of defensive intervention by her companions, leaving her isolated and vulnerable as 400+ pounds of muscle and claws covered the final yards between them. Chloe's livestream captured the entire attack sequence in horrifying detail, providing documentation that would later be analyzed frame by frame by wildlife experts, emergency responders, and media investigators. The footage showed Bear YNP 2024-47's massive form filling the phone's screen as he closed the distance, his powerful stride and focused attention creating an image of unstoppable natural force. The audio recorded Chloe's transition from excitement to terror as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. The initial contact occurred at 1:44:03 p.m. when Bear YNP 2024-47 struck Chloe with his front paws, knocking her backward and causing her to drop her phone while screaming. The bear's claws, designed for climbing trees and digging, caused immediate lacerations across Chloe's chest and arms as she fell. The impact of the bear's strike was sufficient to lift Chloe off her feet and throw her several feet backward, demonstrating the incredible power differential between humans and large predators. Jason's bear spray deployment occurred simultaneously with the bear's initial strike, creating a cloud of pepper spray that should have deterred the attack under normal circumstances. However, Bear YNP 2024-47's committed charge carried him through the spray cloud and into direct contact with Chloe before the deterrent could take effect. The spray would later prove effective in limiting the duration of the attack, but its deployment came too late to prevent the initial contact that caused Chloe's most serious injuries. Marcus's immediate response was to rush toward the attack site while preparing his own bear spray, despite the obvious personal danger such intervention represented. His decision to approach an active bear attack demonstrated both courage and understanding that Chloe's survival depended on immediate assistance. Emma's response was to scream while attempting to retreat to a safe position, a reaction that was both understandable and appropriate given her lack of wilderness training. The attack sequence lasted approximately 23 seconds from initial contact to the bear's departure from the immediate area. During this time, Bear YNP 2024-47 struck Chloe repeatedly with his claws while attempting to bite her head and neck area. Chloe's defensive movements and protective positioning prevented the most lethal potential injuries, but she sustained serious lacerations to her scalp, face, arms, and torso. The bear's teeth caused puncture wounds to her left shoulder and upper arm, while his claws created deep cuts across her chest and defensive wounds on her hands and forearms. Chloe's livestream phone continued recording during the attack, though the device had been knocked to the ground and was providing only audio documentation of the encounter. The sound captured by the phone included Chloe's screams, the bear's vocalizations, and the shouts of her companions as they attempted to intervene. Over 18,000 viewers were listening to the attack in real time, with many recording the audio stream and distributing it across social media platforms, even as the incident was occurring. Jason's second deployment of bear spray at 1:44:18 p.m. proved more effective, as Bear YNP 2024-47 had been exposed to the initial spray cloud long enough for the deterrent effects to begin influencing his behavior. The second spray application was better positioned to create a barrier between the bear and Chloe, forcing the animal to retreat several yards while still maintaining visual contact with the group. The bear's response to the spray indicated previous experience with the deterrent, but also showed that his habituation to humans had reduced its effectiveness compared to typical bear encounters. Marcus reached the attack site at 1:44:26 p.m., positioning himself between Chloe and the bear while deploying his own bear spray to reinforce Jason's deterrent efforts. The combined spray applications created a more effective barrier, though Bear YNP 2024-47 remained in the immediate area rather than fleeing as would be expected from a bear with appropriate wariness of humans. Marcus's intervention allowed him to assess Chloe's injuries while maintaining defensive positioning against potential renewed attack. Chloe's condition immediately following the attack was serious, but not immediately life-threatening, though several of her injuries required urgent medical attention to prevent complications. The most concerning wounds were the puncture injuries to her shoulder and upper arm, which had penetrated deeply enough to damage muscle tissue and potentially affect major blood vessels. The lacerations across her chest and scalp were extensive and bleeding heavily, but appeared to have missed critical structures. Her defensive wounds on her hands and forearms were painful and would require surgical repair, but were not life-threatening. At 1:44:47 p.m., Bear YNP 2024-47 finally began retreating from the immediate attack site, moving approximately 50 yards away while maintaining visual contact with the group. The bear's behavior during his retreat was consistent with defensive rather than predatory motivations, suggesting that his attack had been triggered by perceived threat or opportunity rather than hunting instincts. However, wildlife experts would later emphasize that this distinction provided little comfort given the serious nature of Chloe's injuries and the unpredictable nature of bear behavior. Emma's response during the attack had been to retreat to a defensive position among the granite boulders while calling for help on her cell phone. Her lack of wilderness experience made direct intervention impossible, but her ability to summon emergency assistance would prove critical for Chloe's survival. Emma's 911 call was placed at 1:44:52 p.m., approximately 1 minute after the attack began, providing emergency dispatchers with initial information about the incident location and the nature of Chloe's injuries. The 911 emergency response system in Yosemite National Park is managed through a complex coordination between multiple agencies, including the National Park Service, the Mariposa County Sheriff's Department, and specialized search and rescue organizations. Emma's initial call was received by a dispatcher in Fresno who immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and began implementing established protocols for wilderness medical emergencies involving wildlife attacks. The dispatcher's training and experience would prove crucial in coordinating the multiple agency response that Chloe's situation required. Jason's medical training, acquired through Wilderness First Responder certification, became immediately relevant as he began assessing and treating Chloe's injuries while maintaining awareness of Bear YNP 2024-47's continued presence in the area. His first priority was controlling bleeding from the most serious wounds, using clothing and bandages from their first aid kit to apply direct pressure to the puncture wounds on Chloe's shoulder and arm. The lacerations across her chest and scalp were also bleeding heavily, but their superficial nature made them less immediately threatening than the deeper puncture injuries. Marcus continued monitoring Bear YNP 2024-47's position while assisting with Chloe's medical care and attempting to recover her phone, which was still live streaming the aftermath of the attack to an audience that had grown to over 25,000 viewers. The live stream had captured the audio of the entire attack sequence, creating documentation that would be distributed across social media platforms and analyzed by millions of people within hours of the incident. Marcus's decision to recover the phone was motivated partly by concern for Chloe's privacy and partly by recognition of the footage's potential value for wildlife research and incident investigation. Chloe's mental state immediately following the attack was consistent with acute stress reaction, including disorientation, emotional numbness, and difficulty processing what had happened to her. Her responses to Jason's medical questions were delayed and sometimes confused, though she remained conscious and able to communicate basic information about her pain levels and symptoms. The psychological trauma of the attack would prove to be as significant as her physical injuries, though its full impact would not become apparent until the following weeks and months. At 1:47 p.m., Approximately 3 minutes after the attack, Emma's 911 call resulted in the dispatch of multiple emergency response resources, including a helicopter medical evacuation team from the park's Emergency Services Division, ground-based search and rescue personnel, and wildlife management officers who would be responsible for managing the bear situation. The complexity of wilderness medical emergencies in locations like Yosemite requires coordination between multiple specialized teams, each with specific responsibilities and capabilities. The helicopter medical evacuation team, based at the park's emergency services facility near Yosemite Valley, consisted of a pilot, a flight paramedic, and a rescue technician trained in wilderness medical operations. The team's helicopter was equipped with advanced medical equipment and could provide emergency medical care during transport to the regional trauma center in Fresno. However, the helicopter's ability to operate in the granite boulder fields near Half Dome was limited by terrain and weather conditions, potentially requiring ground-based rescue operations to move Chloe to a suitable landing zone. Ground-based search and rescue operations were initiated through the Yosemite Search and Rescue Team, a specialized group of park rangers and volunteers with extensive training in wilderness rescue techniques. The team's response to the bear attack location would require hiking approximately 6.8 miles from the nearest vehicle-accessible location, carrying specialized medical equipment and bear management tools. The estimated response time for the ground team was approximately 2.5 to 3 hours, depending on trail conditions and the weight of equipment required for the rescue operation. Wildlife management response was coordinated through the park's wildlife biologist and law enforcement rangers with specialized training in bear management. Their immediate priorities included locating and assessing bear YNP 2024-47 to determine whether the animal posed ongoing threats to rescue personnel or park visitors, and implementing management actions that might include relocation or lethal removal, depending on the bear's behavior and history. The wildlife team's response would also include investigation of the attack circumstances to determine factors that contributed to the encounter and develop recommendations for preventing similar incidents. Jason's wilderness first responder training provided valuable capabilities for managing Chloe's injuries during the extended period before professional medical assistance could arrive. His assessment revealed that while Chloe's injuries were serious, proper wound care and bleeding control could stabilize her condition until evacuation was possible. The most concerning aspect of her situation was the potential for infection in the puncture wounds, which would require antibiotic treatment and surgical cleaning that were beyond the capabilities of wilderness first aid. Marcus's photography equipment proved valuable for documenting Chloe's injuries for medical personnel who would be treating her, providing detailed images that would assist with treatment planning during her evacuation and initial hospital care. The documentation would also prove important for the incident investigation and potential legal proceedings related to the attack. Marcus's professional experience with medical and emergency photography had taught him to capture information that would be valuable for multiple purposes while respecting the privacy and dignity of injured subjects. At 1:52 p.m., Bear YNP 2024-47 moved further away from the attack site, traveling approximately 150 yards while still remaining visible to the group. The bear's behavior continued to show habituation problems, as wild bears would typically flee much greater distances after an encounter involving bear spray deployment. Wildlife experts would later analyze the bear's post-attack behavior as indicating previous negative experiences with humans that had failed to establish appropriate avoidance behaviors. Emma's role during the post-attack period focused on maintaining communication with emergency services while managing Chloe's social media accounts and the ongoing live stream situation. The attack footage was spreading rapidly across multiple platforms, generating millions of views and creating a media situation that would require careful management to protect Chloe's interests and privacy. Emma's marketing background provided valuable skills for managing the social media crisis, though the situation was unprecedented in her professional experience. The live stream audience had grown to over 35,000 viewers during the attack and its immediate aftermath, with viewer engagement reaching levels that exceeded anything in social media history for real-time wildlife encounters. Comments ranged from expressions of concern and offers of help, to criticism of Chloe's decisions leading up to the attack, to morbid fascination with the dramatic footage. Many viewers were recording and redistributing the content, creating a permanent record of the incident that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Chloe's social media management during the crisis became a complex balancing act between maintaining engagement with concerned followers, protecting her privacy during a vulnerable time, and managing the potential reputational impact of the incident on her brand and career. Emma's decisions about what information to share and how to frame the incident would have significant implications for Chloe's recovery and future social media activities. The unprecedented nature of the situation required careful consideration of legal, medical, and professional factors. At 2:15 p.m., the first radio contact was established between the emergency response teams and the attack site, with Emma providing updated information about Chloe's condition and the group's exact location. The communication allowed emergency services to refine their response planning and provide remote medical guidance to Jason as he continued treating Chloe's injuries. The establishment of reliable communication also provided psychological comfort to the group, confirming that help was en route and that their situation was being managed by professional emergency services. The helicopter medical team's assessment of the terrain around the attack site revealed that direct evacuation from the location would be impossible due to the granite boulder fields and lack of suitable landing areas. Instead, the helicopter would need to land at a clearing approximately 1.2 miles away, requiring ground personnel to move Chloe to the evacuation site. This complication would extend the time required for medical evacuation, but was necessary given the terrain limitations of helicopter operations in Yosemite's granite landscape. Ground-based search and rescue personnel began their approach to the incident site at 2:20 p.m., carrying specialized equipment for medical stabilization and patient transport across difficult terrain. The rescue team included personnel with advanced medical training, specialized stretchers designed for wilderness evacuations, and bear management equipment necessary for operating safely in the area where Bear YNP 2024-47 remained present. The team's estimated arrival time at the attack site was approximately 4:15 p.m. Jason's continued medical monitoring of Chloe revealed that her condition was remaining stable, though several of her wounds continued bleeding despite pressure bandaging. Her vital signs were within acceptable ranges, and she remained conscious and responsive to questions about her symptoms and pain levels. However, the extended time period before professional medical care could arrive created ongoing concerns about infection risk and the possibility of complications from her injuries. At 2:35 p.m., wildlife management personnel made visual contact with Bear YNP 2024-47 from a distance of approximately 400 yards, confirming the animal's location and assessing his behavior for signs of continued aggression or territorial defense. The bear's behavior appeared calm, but showed concerning lack of appropriate wariness, remaining in the general area rather than fleeing to avoid further human contact. Wildlife experts would later identify this behavior as consistent with problematic habituation that made the bear dangerous to both rescue personnel and future park visitors. The decision-making process for managing Bear YNP 2024-47 involved complex considerations of public safety, wildlife conservation, and operational necessity for completing Chloe's rescue. Park policy generally prioritized non-lethal management of wildlife conflicts, but the bear's attack on humans and continued presence near the rescue operation created circumstances where lethal removal might be necessary. The decision would ultimately be made by senior wildlife management personnel based on assessment of ongoing risks and the bear's behavioral patterns. Marcus's documentation of the post-attack period provided valuable information for understanding the full scope of the incident and its impact on all participants. His photographs captured not only Chloe's medical situation, but also the emotional reactions of other group members, the challenging terrain that complicated rescue operations, and the ongoing wildlife management situation created by Bear YNP 2024-47's presence. The comprehensive documentation would prove valuable for multiple investigative and research purposes. At 3 p.m., Chloe's live stream was finally ended by Emma, who made the decision to protect her friend's privacy during the extended medical situation. The stream had been viewed by over 50,000 people during its duration, with the attack sequence being recorded and distributed across numerous social media platforms. The decision to end the stream was controversial among viewers who wanted continued updates, but was necessary to protect Chloe's medical privacy and allow the rescue operation to proceed without the complications of live social media coverage. The social media impact of the incident was immediate and enormous, with hashtags related to the attack trending across multiple platforms within hours of the incident. News organizations began picking up the story, contacting Emma and other members of the group for interviews and additional information. The media attention would continue to grow throughout the rescue operation and Chloe's subsequent hospitalization, creating ongoing challenges for managing her privacy and public image during recovery. Emma's management of the media situation required careful coordination with emergency services personnel who were concerned about interference with rescue operations. Park officials who were responsible for managing public information about the incident, and legal representatives who were advising about potential liability and privacy issues. The complexity of managing a major social media incident during an ongoing emergency created unprecedented challenges that required careful navigation of multiple competing interests. At 3:30 p.m., Jason's medical assessment revealed that Chloe was developing early signs of shock, including increased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, and changes in mental status that indicated her body's response to blood loss and trauma. The development of shock symptoms created increased urgency for professional medical care, though Jason's wilderness medical training provided tools for managing the condition until evacuation could be completed. Treatment included elevating Chloe's legs, providing warmth, and continuing fluid replacement with electrolyte solutions from their emergency supplies. The ground-based rescue team's progress toward the attack site was slowed by difficult terrain and the weight of medical equipment necessary for treating and transporting a trauma patient. Radio communication every 15 minutes provided updates on their progress and allowed coordination with the helicopter team that would complete Chloe's evacuation. The rescue team's estimated arrival was revised to approximately 4:30 p.m. based on terrain challenges and equipment requirements. Bear YNP 2024-47's behavior during the afternoon remained problematic from a wildlife management perspective, with the animal showing continued presence in the area rather than appropriate avoidance of human activity. Wildlife management personnel maintained observation from safe distances while developing plans for either relocating or removing the bear, depending on his response to the rescue operation. The bear's history of problematic encounters and his attack on Chloe created strong arguments for lethal removal, but park policy required exhausting non-lethal alternatives whenever operationally feasible. At 3:45 p.m., Marcus established a defensive perimeter around Chloe's position, using their remaining bear spray canisters and emergency whistle signals designed to deter wildlife approach during the medical emergency. His positioning provided early warning capability for any renewed bear activity, while allowing Jason to focus entirely on medical care. The defensive preparations were necessary, given Bear YNP 2024-47's continued presence and the group's vulnerability during the extended rescue period. Chloe's mental state during the afternoon showed signs of both acute stress reaction and physiological shock, with periods of clarity alternating with confusion and emotional numbness. Her responses to Jason's medical questions became increasingly delayed, though she maintained consciousness and basic communication ability. The combination of physical trauma, blood loss, and psychological shock created complex medical challenges that would require specialized treatment beyond wilderness first aid capabilities. Emma's coordination with emergency services included providing detailed GPS coordinates, updated weather conditions, and assessment of landing zone alternatives that might reduce the distance required for patient transport. Her marketing background had developed strong communication and organizational skills that proved valuable for managing the complex logistics of wilderness rescue operations. The coordination also included managing the growing media attention that was beginning to complicate rescue operations through requests for information and attempts to access the incident site. At 4 p.m., the first members of the ground-based rescue team made radio contact from approximately 1 mile away, confirming their approach route and requesting updated information about Chloe's medical condition and Bear YNP 2024-47's location. The communication allowed refinement of rescue plans and coordination with wildlife management personnel who would need to secure the area before medical operations could proceed safely. The rescue team's approach also triggered implementation of protocols for managing media access and protecting the privacy of all involved parties. Jason's medical care during the extended rescue period included regular monitoring of Chloe's vital signs, continued wound care and bleeding control, and management of shock symptoms through positioning and fluid replacement. His Wilderness First Responder certification had prepared him for exactly this type of extended care situation, where professional medical assistance was hours away and patient stabilization required sustained effort. The quality of his care would later be credited by hospital personnel as significantly improving Chloe's treatment outcomes. The helicopter medical team's preparation for receiving Chloe included coordination with the Regional Trauma Center in Fresno, advance notification of surgical teams, and preparation of blood products for potential transfusion during transport. The complexity of her injuries required specialized trauma care that was available only at designated trauma centers, making rapid transport critical for optimal treatment outcomes. The helicopter's medical equipment included advanced life support capabilities that would allow continued stabilization during the flight to definitive care. At 4:15 p.m., wildlife management personnel made the decision to attempt non-lethal hazing of Bear YNP 2024-47 using rubber bullets and loud noisemakers, hoping to drive the animal away from the rescue area without requiring lethal removal. The hazing attempt was coordinated with the approaching rescue team to ensure that bear management activities would not interfere with medical operations. However, Wildlife experts remained prepared to implement lethal removal if hazing proved ineffective or if the bear showed renewed aggressive behavior. Marcus's photography during the rescue operation documented not only the medical and logistical challenges, but also the emotional impact of the incident on all participants. His images captured Jason's focused medical care, Emma's coordination efforts, and Chloe's fluctuating condition during the extended emergency period. The documentation would prove valuable for both incident investigation and training purposes, providing detailed records of how wilderness medical emergencies develop and are managed in challenging conditions. The social media impact continued expanding throughout the afternoon, with major news organizations beginning to contact Emma and park officials for statements and interviews about the incident. The combination of dramatic attack footage, popular social media personality, and iconic location created a story that generated enormous public interest. Emma's decisions about media interaction would significantly influence how the incident was portrayed and its long-term impact on Chloe's career and reputation. At 4:25 p.m., the lead members of the ground-based rescue team arrived at the attack site, immediately beginning assessment of Chloe's condition and preparation for transport to the helicopter landing zone. The rescue team included a paramedic with advanced wilderness medical training, whose assessment confirmed Jason's diagnosis and treatment while providing additional medical interventions, including intravenous fluid replacement and advanced pain management. The arrival of professional medical personnel marked a critical transition in Chloe's care from wilderness first aid to advanced emergency medical services. The rescue team's medical assessment revealed that Chloe's condition had remained stable during the extended first aid period, largely due to Jason's effective bleeding control and shock management. However, several of her wounds showed signs of contamination that would require aggressive antibiotic treatment and possible surgical cleaning to prevent serious infection. The puncture wounds to her shoulder and arm remained the most concerning injuries, with potential damage to muscle, nerve, and vascular structures requiring specialized evaluation. Bear management operations at 4:30 p.m. successfully moved Bear YNP 2024-47 approximately 800 yards away from the rescue site using rubber bullets and noisemakers, though the bear's response remained problematic. Rather than fleeing the area entirely, as would be expected from appropriately wary bears, YNP 2024-47 relocated to a position where he remained visible and continued monitoring human activity. Wildlife management personnel concluded that the bear's habituation problems were severe enough to require removal from the ecosystem to protect future park visitors. Chloe's transport from the attack site to the helicopter landing zone required specialized wilderness rescue techniques, including a wheeled litter designed for rough terrain and multiple personnel to manage the challenging granite landscape. The 1.2-mile transport took approximately 45 minutes, during which the rescue paramedic continued IV fluid replacement and monitoring of vital signs. Chloe remained conscious during transport, though her responses to questions continued showing signs of shock and psychological trauma. At 5:15 p.m., Chloe was loaded into the medical helicopter for transport to Community Regional Medical Center in Fresno, California's designated Level 1 trauma center. The helicopter's medical crew included a flight nurse and paramedic with specialized training in wilderness trauma cases, providing advanced care capabilities during the 35-minute flight. The helicopter's equipment included blood products, advanced airway management tools, and cardiac monitoring systems that allowed continued stabilization during transport to definitive care. Marcus, Jason, and Emma remained at the incident site to provide statements to investigating officers and assist with recovery of equipment and evidence related to the attack. Park law enforcement personnel conducted detailed interviews with each witness, documenting the sequence of events leading up to the attack and the group's response during the emergency. The investigation would continue for several weeks, examining factors that contributed to the encounter and developing recommendations for preventing similar incidents. The media attention reached national levels during the evening hours, with major news networks featuring the story and social media platforms experiencing unprecedented engagement with attack-related content. Emma's management of media requests became a full-time responsibility, requiring coordination with park officials, legal representatives, and eventually professional public relations consultants. The scale of media attention exceeded anything typically associated with wilderness accidents, reflecting the unique combination of social media documentation and dramatic wildlife encounter. At 6 p.m., Chloe arrived at Community Regional Medical Center's Trauma Bay, where a surgical team was prepared for immediate evaluation and treatment of her injuries. The trauma team included orthopedic surgeons, plastic surgeons, and infectious disease specialists who would address the complex medical challenges created by bear attack injuries. Initial hospital assessment confirmed the field diagnosis of multiple lacerations and puncture wounds, with particular concern about potential nerve damage in her left arm and the infection risk associated with animal bite wounds. Emergency surgery began at 7:30 p.m., focusing on thorough cleaning and debridement of all wounds, repair of damaged muscle and connective tissue, and assessment of potential nerve and vascular injuries. The surgical team's experience with animal attack injuries provided expertise in managing the specific challenges of bear-inflicted trauma, including the high infection risk and complex wound patterns typical of such encounters. The surgery lasted approximately 4 hours, during which all major injuries were addressed and infection prevention protocols were implemented. Jason, Marcus, and Emma completed their interviews with park investigators at approximately 8 p.m., providing detailed accounts of the group's activities, decision-making processes, and response to the emergency situation. The investigation revealed multiple factors that contributed to the encounter, including the group's extended presence in prime bear habitat, their focus on content creation rather than environmental awareness, and Chloe's decision to approach the bear despite safety warnings from her companions. Bear YNP 2024-47's fate was decided during an emergency wildlife management meeting at 8:30 p.m., where park officials concluded that the bear's habituation problems and history of aggressive encounters made him an unacceptable risk to public safety. The decision for lethal removal was made reluctantly, recognizing that the bear's problematic behavior was largely the result of previous human encounters that had failed to establish appropriate avoidance conditioning. Wildlife management personnel would locate and remove the bear the following morning. Chloe's parents, Miguel and Sandra Ramirez, arrived at Community Regional Medical Center at approximately 10 p.m. after driving from Phoenix upon receiving notification of their daughter's injuries. Their arrival marked the beginning of family involvement in both Chloe's medical care and the management of media attention that continued growing throughout the evening. The family's decisions about media interaction and information sharing would significantly influence public perception of the incident and its aftermath. The surgical team's post-operative assessment indicated that Chloe's injuries, while serious, had been successfully repaired without permanent disability to major muscle groups or nerve function. The most significant ongoing concerns involved infection prevention and psychological trauma treatment, both of which would require extended medical attention. Plastic surgery consultation was scheduled to address scarring issues, particularly facial lacerations, that could affect Chloe's appearance and potentially her social media career. Emma's social media management during the evening included posting updates about Chloe's condition, expressing gratitude for the rescue teams, and attempting to control the narrative around the incident. The challenge involved balancing transparency with privacy concerns, managing criticism of Chloe's decision-making, and maintaining engagement with supporters while avoiding exploitation of the dramatic circumstances. The situation required skills that exceeded typical social media management, leading to consultation with crisis communication specialists. At 11 p.m., park officials held a press conference providing basic information about the incident while protecting the privacy of those involved and avoiding details that might compromise the ongoing investigation. The press conference confirmed that a visitor had been injured in a bear encounter and successfully evacuated to medical care, but avoided sensationalizing the circumstances or encouraging copycat behavior. The careful information management reflected lessons learned from previous wilderness incidents that had generated problematic media attention. Hospital security was increased during the night due to media attention and social media-driven interest in Chloe's condition, with personnel stationed to prevent unauthorized access to her room and protect the privacy of her family during the immediate post-trauma period. The security measures reflected the unprecedented public interest generated by the real-time social media documentation of the attack, which had created celebrity-level attention around what would normally be treated as a private medical emergency. Chloe's first night in the hospital was medically stable, but psychologically difficult, with symptoms of post-traumatic stress, including nightmares, anxiety, and intrusive memories of the attack. Hospital psychiatric consultants began immediate intervention to address acute stress reactions and begin the process of trauma therapy that would be required for her long-term psychological recovery. The mental health aspects of her care would prove as challenging and important as the physical injury treatment. May 10th began with media attention reaching international levels as news organizations around the world picked up the story of the social media influencer who had live-streamed her own bear attack. The combination of dramatic footage, wilderness adventure gone wrong, and social media celebrity created a story that transcended typical wildlife encounter coverage. International media attention brought additional challenges for managing information and protecting Chloe's privacy during her recovery. Miguel and Sandra Ramirez met with hospital administrators and legal representatives at 8 a.m. to discuss management of media attention, privacy protection, and potential legal issues arising from the incident. The family's lack of experience with major media attention required guidance from professionals who specialized in crisis communication and reputation management. Decisions made during these early meetings would significantly influence how the incident affected Chloe's long-term career and personal recovery. Jason, Marcus, and Emma returned to Phoenix on May 10th, facing their own media attention and psychological processing of the traumatic experience they had witnessed. Each would require counseling support to address the impact of witnessing a serious wildlife attack and managing the emergency response that followed. Their experiences would also contribute to research and training programs designed to improve wilderness safety education and emergency response protocols. Chloe's medical condition on May 10th showed signs of good physical recovery, with vital signs stable and wound healing proceeding normally. However, infection monitoring remained critical due to the high bacteria load associated with animal bite wounds, requiring continued antibiotic treatment and careful observation for signs of complications. Physical therapy consultation was initiated to address potential mobility issues and ensure optimal healing of muscle and connective tissue injuries. The psychological impact assessment revealed significant trauma symptoms that would require extended treatment, including anxiety about outdoor activities, intrusive memories of the attack, and concerns about public perception and career impact. Hospital psychiatric services developed a comprehensive treatment plan addressing both acute stress reaction and long-term psychological recovery needs. The treatment plan recognized that Chloe's public profile and social media career created unique challenges for trauma recovery. Bear YNP 2024-47 was located and removed by wildlife management personnel at 9:30 a.m. on May 10th, ending the immediate public safety threat created by his problematic habituation. The bear's removal was conducted professionally and humanely, though wildlife biologists noted the tragic necessity of destroying an animal whose dangerous behavior was largely the result of inappropriate human interactions. The incident highlighted ongoing challenges in managing human-wildlife conflicts in popular wilderness areas. Media coverage during May 10th included extensive analysis of social media influencer culture, wilderness safety practices, and wildlife management policies. Expert commentators discussed the incident's implications for social media-driven tourism, the balance between accessibility and safety in national parks, and the responsibility of content creators to model appropriate behavior. The coverage ranged from sympathetic to highly critical, reflecting diverse public opinions about social media culture and wilderness recreation. Chloe's social media accounts continued generating enormous engagement during her hospitalization, with followers expressing support, criticism, and curiosity about her condition and recovery prospects. Emma's management of the accounts required careful balancing of maintaining audience engagement while protecting Chloe's privacy and avoiding exploitation of her traumatic experience. The decisions made during this period would influence Chloe's ability to rebuild her social media career following recovery. The investigation by park officials continued with analysis of the live-stream footage, witness interviews, and examination of factors that contributed to the encounter. Preliminary findings identified multiple contributing factors, including inadequate bear safety education, problematic group dynamics that prioritized content creation over safety, and Bear YNP 2024-47's history of habituation issues. The investigation would ultimately result in recommendations for improving visitor education and wildlife management practices. Community Regional Medical Center's trauma team provided regular updates to Chloe's family while maintaining strict privacy protocols to protect her medical information from unauthorized disclosure. The updates indicated continued improvement in her physical condition, with wound healing proceeding normally and no signs of infection complications. However, medical staff emphasized that psychological recovery would likely require months of specialized treatment and support. At 2 p.m. on May 10th, Chloe was moved from intensive care to a regular hospital room, marking significant progress in her physical recovery. The transition allowed increased family visitation and began the process of planning for her eventual discharge and return to Arizona. However, medical staff emphasized that her recovery would require extensive follow-up care, including continued wound management, physical therapy, and psychological counseling services. The social media impact analysis conducted by digital marketing specialists revealed that attack-related content had generated over 100 million views across all platforms within 48 hours of the incident. The engagement levels exceeded typical viral content by several orders of magnitude, reflecting the unprecedented nature of real-time wildlife attack documentation. The analysis would inform understanding of how social media amplifies and distributes dramatic content, with implications for both marketing and public safety education. Chloe's first interview with hospital psychiatric services on May 10th, revealed the complex psychological impact of the attack, including survivor guilt, anxiety about public perception, and concerns about her ability to continue her outdoor adventure content creation. The psychological assessment identified multiple factors that would require ongoing treatment, including post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, and adjustment difficulties related to her public profile and career impact. Emma's coordination with legal representatives addressed potential liability issues, privacy concerns, and the management of commercial interests related to the attack footage and media coverage. The legal complexities involved intellectual property rights, medical privacy laws, and potential claims related to the incident circumstances. Legal guidance would be essential for protecting Chloe's interests while managing the unprecedented public attention and commercial opportunities created by the incident. By May 11th, medical assessment indicated that Chloe's physical recovery was progressing well enough to begin planning for discharge, though several weeks of outpatient treatment would be required for complete wound healing. The discharge planning included coordination with Arizona medical providers who would continue her care, arrangements for specialized services, including plastic surgery and psychological counseling, and protocols for managing continued media attention during her recovery period. The Park Service investigation continued with detailed analysis of the group's permit application, itinerary planning, and preparation activities leading up to the trip. Investigators found that while the group had technically complied with permit requirements and basic safety regulations, their actual preparation and decision-making revealed significant gaps in wilderness safety knowledge and appropriate risk assessment. The findings would contribute to recommendations for improving visitor education and permit procedures. Jason's academic research on social media's impact on wilderness visitation gained sudden relevance and urgency following his direct involvement in the incident. His thesis work would incorporate first-hand experience with the challenges created when content creation priorities conflict with wilderness safety practices. The research would contribute to academic understanding of social media's impact on public land management and visitor behavior. Marcus's photography business experienced both positive and negative impacts from his association with the incident, with some clients seeking his services due to his proven ability to handle crisis situations, while others expressed concerns about safety risks associated with adventure photography. His professional response to the emergency had demonstrated expertise that would influence his career trajectory, though the traumatic experience would also affect his approach to wilderness photography. Chloe's parents began working with crisis communication specialists to develop a strategy for managing her eventual return to public life and social media activity. The strategy needed to address public criticism of her decision-making while maintaining her brand value and audience engagement. The approach would influence whether she could successfully rebuild her social media career or would need to transition to different professional activities. The wildlife management community began analyzing the incident for lessons about bear habituation, visitor education, and management policies in popular wilderness areas. Bear YNP 2024-47's History and Behavior Patterns provided valuable case study material for understanding how habituation develops and what management interventions might be effective for preventing similar problems. The analysis would contribute to improved wildlife management practices in national parks and other protected areas. Media coverage evolved during May 11th to include broader discussions about social media culture, wilderness safety education, and the responsibilities of content creators to their audiences. Expert commentary addressed questions about whether social media platforms should implement policies regarding dangerous content, how outdoor recreation organizations should respond to influencer culture, and what role government agencies should play in regulating wilderness content creation. Chloe's medical team continued monitoring for potential complications while beginning the transition to outpatient care planning. The physical healing process was proceeding normally, but medical staff emphasized that complete recovery would require months of follow-up treatment. The medical team's experience with trauma cases provided expertise in managing both the physical and psychological aspects of recovery from violent encounters. The hospital's legal and privacy teams worked to manage ongoing media requests while protecting Chloe's medical privacy and family access. The unprecedented level of media attention created challenges that exceeded typical hospital procedures, requiring specialized protocols for managing celebrity-level attention in a medical setting. The hospital's response would influence how similar situations might be handled in the future. Emma's role as social media manager evolved into crisis communication coordinator, requiring skills and knowledge that exceeded her previous experience. Her decisions about information sharing, audience engagement, and brand management would significantly influence Chloe's ability to recover both personally and professionally from the incident. The experience would also affect Emma's own career trajectory and understanding of social media's impact on personal safety and privacy. On May 12th, Chloe was discharged from Community Regional Medical Center to return home to Phoenix for continued outpatient treatment. The discharge marked the end of the acute medical phase of her recovery, but the beginning of a longer process of physical healing, psychological treatment, and professional rehabilitation. Her return home would also mark the beginning of decisions about how to rebuild her public presence and social media career. The media attention continued at high levels during Chloe's discharge, with photographers and reporters attempting to document her departure from the hospital. Security measures were implemented to protect her privacy and safety during the transition, reflecting the ongoing public fascination with her story and recovery process. The media management during this transition would influence public perception and her ability to control her narrative going forward. Chloe's first statement to media, delivered through her family's legal representatives, expressed gratitude for the rescue teams, medical personnel, and public support, while acknowledging responsibility for poor decision-making that contributed to the attack. The statement was carefully crafted to balance accountability with maintaining her public image and brand value. The public response to her statement would influence her path forward in social media and content creation. The Park Service released preliminary findings from their investigation on May 12th, identifying multiple factors that contributed to the incident, including inadequate visitor preparation, problematic bear habituation, and group dynamics that prioritized content creation over safety awareness. The findings would contribute to policy recommendations for improving wilderness safety education and managing social media-driven visitation to national parks. Bear YNP 2024-47's necropsy results revealed a healthy adult male, black bear, with no unusual physical characteristics that might have contributed to his aggressive behavior. The examination confirmed that his problematic behavior was likely the result of habituation to human food sources and positive reinforcement from successful encounters with park visitors. The findings supported wildlife management decisions about the necessity of his removal while highlighting the importance of visitor education and food storage compliance. Jason's thesis research gained new dimensions following his direct experience with social media-driven wilderness visitation and its safety implications. His academic work would contribute to understanding of how digital culture influences outdoor recreation patterns and what management strategies might be effective for addressing associated challenges. The research would have both academic and practical applications for land management agencies. Marcus's photography career trajectory was influenced by his professional response to the crisis situation, demonstrating expertise in emergency documentation and crisis management that would differentiate his services in the adventure photography market. However, the traumatic experience also affected his personal relationship with wilderness photography, requiring psychological processing and potentially influencing his future project choices. The incident's impact on Yosemite National Park included increased scrutiny of visitor education programs, wildlife management policies, and permit procedures for wilderness activities. Park officials began reviewing policies for social media content creation in wilderness areas, considering whether additional regulations or educational requirements might be necessary to prevent similar incidents. The review process would influence how national parks manage the intersection of social media culture and wilderness recreation. Chloe's homecoming to Phoenix was managed carefully to minimize media intrusion while allowing some documentation of her recovery process. Her family's home became a temporary base for coordinating medical care, legal consultation, and gradual re-engagement with social media activities. The transition from hospital care to home-based recovery marked a new phase in her healing process and career rehabilitation. The psychological treatment plan developed for Chloe's recovery included specialized trauma therapy, anxiety management, and career counseling to address the complex intersection of personal healing and professional concerns. The treatment recognized that her public profile and social media career created unique challenges for trauma recovery, requiring approaches that addressed both personal healing and public image management. Emma's continued role in managing Chloe's affairs expanded beyond social media management to include coordination with medical providers, legal representatives, and family members. The experience provided valuable professional development in crisis management and client advocacy, though it also created personal stress and trauma symptoms that required their own treatment and support. Emma's decisions during this period would significantly influence Chloe's recovery trajectory. The legal analysis of the incident addressed multiple potential issues, including liability questions, privacy concerns, and intellectual property rights related to the attack footage and subsequent media coverage. The legal complexities reflected the unprecedented nature of real-time social media documentation of a wilderness emergency, creating new precedents for how similar situations might be handled in the future. By late May 2024, Chloe's physical recovery was progressing well, with wound healing occurring normally and no significant complications from her injuries. However, the psychological impact continued to present challenges, with anxiety symptoms affecting her sleep, appetite, and daily activities. The recovery process would require months of continued treatment and gradual re-exposure to outdoor activities that had previously defined her career and personal identity. The social media landscape analysis revealed long-term changes in how audiences engaged with adventure content, with increased skepticism about influencer authenticity and greater awareness of safety considerations in wilderness recreation. Chloe's incident had influenced broader conversations about responsible content creation and the balance between entertainment value and safety modeling. These changes would affect the entire outdoor influencer industry, not just Chloe's individual career. The academic research emerging from the incident contributed to multiple fields of study, including social media psychology, wildlife management, emergency response protocols, and outdoor recreation safety. Jason's thesis became part of a broader body of research examining how digital culture influences human behavior in natural environments, with implications for both individual safety and ecosystem protection. Chloe's gradual return to social media activity in June 2024 was carefully managed to rebuild audience engagement while addressing the incident's impact on her brand and credibility. Her content strategy evolved to include more educational elements about wilderness safety, though maintaining the adventure and lifestyle elements that had originally built her following. The balance between entertainment and education would define her post-incident career trajectory. The incident's long-term impact on wilderness recreation included increased awareness of bear safety protocols, greater scrutiny of social media content creation in natural areas, and enhanced visitor education programs in national parks. Park agencies incorporated lessons learned from Chloe's attack into their educational materials and visitor orientation programs, potentially preventing similar incidents in the future. Bear management policies in Yosemite and other parks were reviewed and updated based on analysis of Bear YNP 2024-47's history and behavior patterns. The review emphasized the importance of preventing habituation through consistent enforcement of food storage regulations and appropriate response to early signs of problematic bear behavior. The policy changes would influence wildlife management practices across the national park system. The media coverage analysis revealed significant public interest in stories that combine social media culture with wilderness adventure, suggesting that similar incidents might generate comparable attention levels. Media organizations developed new protocols for covering social media-related emergencies, balancing public interest with privacy concerns and avoiding content that might encourage dangerous behavior. Chloe's recovery process continued throughout the summer of 2024, with gradual improvement in both physical and psychological symptoms. Her return to outdoor activities was managed carefully through therapeutic exposure and professional guidance, allowing her to rebuild confidence while maintaining appropriate safety awareness. The recovery process would influence her long-term relationship with wilderness recreation and content creation. The incident's educational impact extended beyond immediate safety lessons to broader questions about risk assessment, decision-making under pressure, and the influence of social media incentives on behavior in dangerous situations. Educational institutions and outdoor recreation organizations incorporated the case study into their safety training programs, using Chloe's experience to illustrate important principles about wilderness risk management. By autumn 2024, Chloe had successfully rebuilt a significant portion of her social media following while transitioning to content that emphasized safety, education, and responsible outdoor recreation. Her experience as an attack survivor provided unique credibility for discussing wilderness safety topics, though it also meant that she would always be associated with the dramatic events of May 9, 2024. Her career evolution demonstrated the possibility of recovery and growth following traumatic incidents, though the path required significant personal and professional adaptation. The lasting impact of the grizzly bear attack on TikToker Chloe Ramirez extended far beyond her individual experience, influencing outdoor recreation culture, social media content creation standards, wildlife management policies, and emergency response protocols. The incident served as a watershed moment in the intersection of digital culture and wilderness recreation, demonstrating both the opportunities and risks created when social media incentives meet natural environments. The comprehensive documentation of the event, from the live-streamed attack through the extended recovery process, provided unprecedented insight into how modern technology and traditional wilderness challenges interact, creating new categories of risk and opportunity that continue to influence outdoor recreation and social media industries. The lessons learned from May 9th, 2024 continue to resonate throughout the outdoor recreation community, wildlife management agencies, and social media platforms, serving as a reminder that the digital age has not eliminated the fundamental dangers and responsibilities associated with wilderness travel. Chloe's story became a case study in resilience, recovery, and the complex relationship between technology and nature, demonstrating that even dramatic failures can lead to positive changes in how society approaches the intersection of digital culture and wilderness recreation. Her experience ultimately contributed to safer practices, better education, and more responsible content creation, though the price of these lessons was nearly her life and will affect her forever.